Colorado Territory, 1871. The sun hung low over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the lonely train platform of Clearwater Junction. Dust devils swirled in the late summer air as Levi Quinn leaned against the weathered wooden post, watching the approaching train with disinterested eyes. At 25, he had already lived more lives than most men twice his age, cowhand, tracker, occasionally a gun for hire when the situation demanded. The years had carved line, hard muscle onto his tall frame and left a faint scar across his left cheekbone, but had done nothing to soften the wariness in his gaze. He adjusted his worn Stetson, shielding eyes that had seen too much death on this untamed frontier. The Great War had ended 6 years prior, but out here in the territories, different battles raged on against the land, the elements, outlaws, and sometimes a man's own demons. Might be a fool's errand, Levi muttered to himself, squinting at the approaching plume of smoke on the horizon. The Blackwell Ranch needed hands, and Mr. Blackwell had sent him to meet the eastbound train on the chance some greenhorn might be looking for work. But Levi knew better. No one came to Clearwater unless they were running from something or had nowhere else to go. That's why he'd ended up here 3 years ago, after all. The frontier had taught Levi one truth he held above all others. A man survives best when he stands alone. Attachments were dangerous liabilities in a land where death could come from a stray bullet, a winter blizzard, or 1,000 other merciless ends. He'd buried enough friends to know the cost of caring too deeply. "Train's coming in," called the station master, an older man with rheumy eyes who barely glanced up from his newspaper. Levi nodded, straightening his lean frame as the locomotive's whistle pierced the evening air. His hand instinctively checked the revolver at his hip, a habit born of necessary caution rather than paranoia. The iron horse rumbled into the station, belching smoke and steam as it ground to a halt with a squeal of metal against metal. He watched dispassionately as passengers began to disembark, a drummer with sample cases, a well-dressed man who must be heading to the silver mines north of town, a family with 2 small children looking weary and overwhelmed, no one who looked like ranch material. Then she stepped onto the platform. She emerged from the passenger car with careful precision, one gloved hand lifting the hem of her dove-gray traveling dress clear of the metal steps. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, though a few rebellious strands had escaped to frame a face that seemed almost luminous in the fading light. At perhaps 20 years old, she carried herself with a composure that seemed at odds with her youth, and the uncertainty in her wide hazel eyes as she surveyed the dusty platform. Levi felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, not quite recognition, but something deeper and more unsettling. He quickly tamped it down. Pretty Eastern girls with fine manners had no place in his world, and he had no business noticing the way sunset caught gold highlights in her hair. The young woman stood alone on the platform now as the other passengers dispersed. Her gaze darted around, clearly searching for someone who wasn't there to meet her. The porter set down her single trunk and 2 smaller valises before tipping his hat and returning to the train. Something was wrong. No one traveled alone to Clearwater, especially not a young woman of obvious refinement. Levi watched her straighten her shoulders and approach the station master, speaking too quietly for him to hear. The old man shook his head and pointed vaguely toward town, his indifference clear even from a distance. The woman's composure faltered for just a moment, a slight tremor in her gloved hands, a quick biting of her lower lip, before she nodded and turned back to her luggage. Levi told himself to walk away. Whatever trouble had brought this woman to Clearwater was none of his concern. The ranch needed cowhands, not Eastern ladies with delicate manners. But his boots seemed rooted to the wooden planks of the platform. She was trying to lift one of the valises when he finally approached, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Seems you might be in need of some assistance." She startled slightly, those remarkable hazel eyes widening as they met his. Up close, he could see the golden flecks in their green depths, the faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose, and the way exhaustion had drawn shadows beneath her eyes despite her youth. She hesitated, clutching her reticule more tightly. "Yes, thank you. I was expecting to be met by a Mr. Hargrove, but he appears to be delayed." Her voice carried the refinement of Eastern education, but underneath it, Levi detected something else. Determination, perhaps, or desperation carefully controlled. "James Hargrove?" Levi asked, his brow furrowing. "Yes, do you know him?" Levi hesitated, then decided the truth was kinder than silence. "Ma'am, James Hargrove died 3 months back. Influenza took him and his wife both." The color drained from her face, and for a moment Levi thought she might faint, but she drew a deep breath instead, squaring those slender shoulders again. "I see," she said softly. "That complicates matters." "You're a relation?" Levi asked, though he knew the Hargroves had no family in these parts. "No, her voice faltered. "I was to be their children's governess. Mr. Hargrove arranged everything by post." "I have the letters here." She gestured vaguely to her reticule. Levi's stomach sank. "Ma'am, the Hargrove children were sent east to their grandparents after their parents passed. There's no position waiting for you here." She swayed slightly, and Levi instinctively reached out to steady her, his calloused hand closing gently around her upper arm. Through the fabric of her sleeve, he could feel how delicate she was beneath his rough touch. "I don't understand," she whispered. "The last letter confirmed my arrival date. I've traveled so far." In that moment, Levi saw the desperation she'd been hiding. This wasn't merely an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe for her. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Charlotte Hayes," she replied, drawing herself up with visible effort. "And you are?" "Levi Quinn. I work at the Blackwell Ranch, about 5 miles outside town." She nodded, clearly struggling to think through her options. Levi glanced at the darkening sky. Night fell quickly in the mountains, and Clearwater was no place for a woman alone after dark. "Miss Hayes," he said, "the train's heading back east tomorrow morning, but you'll need somewhere to stay tonight. There's a boarding house in town run by Mrs. Keller, respectable place." "I can take you there." Charlotte Hayes looked at her trunk, then at the dusty street leading into town, then finally back at Levi. Something shifted in her expression, a decision made. "Mr. Quinn, before I commit to returning east, might I ask if you know of any positions available here? I've spent my entire savings on this journey, and She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable admitting her financial straits. Levi should have said no, should have told her that the frontier was no place for a woman like her, that she'd be better off returning east even if it meant hardship. Instead, he heard himself saying words that would change both their lives forever. "Miss Hayes, I don't know what brought you west, but I suspect you have your reasons for not wanting to go back." He paused, studying her face. "The Blackwell Ranch needs a teacher for the rancher's daughters. It's not what you were expecting, but it's honest work with room and board included." Hope flickered in her eyes, bright and sudden. "A teaching position? I'm qualified, Mr. Quinn. I graduated from the Kensington Academy for Young Ladies in Boston and have extensive training in literature, mathematics, music, and..." Levi held up a hand. "Miss Hayes, I believe you, but you should know what you're considering. The ranch is remote, the work is demanding, the comforts you're accustomed to are scarce out here." "Mr. Quinn," she said, her voice suddenly steady, "I would not have traveled 2,000 miles west if I were afraid of hardship." For the first time, Levi really looked at her, not just at her beauty, which was considerable, but at the steel beneath the proper exterior. He recognized something in her then, a determination that matched his own. "All right," he said finally. "If you're certain, I'll speak to Mr. Blackwell on your behalf. For tonight, let's get you to Mrs. Keller's." As Levi loaded Charlotte's trunk onto his wagon, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something momentous in motion. The frontier was no place for attachments, he reminded himself. This was merely a kindness to a stranded traveler, nothing more. Yet as he helped Charlotte Hayes onto the wagon seat and their eyes met briefly, Levi Quinn felt a tremor in the foundations of the solitary life he'd built for himself. And somewhere deep inside, past all his carefully constructed defenses, a voice whispered that he might come to regret those words spoken on a dusty train platform as the sun sank behind the Colorado mountains. Charlotte Hayes stared up at the beamed ceiling of Mrs. Keller's boarding house, sleep eluding her despite the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled into her body. The modest room was clean but spare, a narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, and a small chest of drawers that had seen better days. Through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of the saloon down the street, occasional laughter and the tinny notes of a piano. How had everything gone so terribly wrong? The Hargroves dead, their children gone. Her carefully laid plans dissolved like sugar in hot tea. She rolled to her side, pulling the rough blanket more tightly around her shoulders. The mountain air carried a chill even in summer, so different from the humid Boston nights she had left behind. Left behind by choice, she reminded herself firmly. There was nothing for her in Boston now except painful memories and impossible debts. Charlotte's fingers traced the small scar at her temple, usually hidden beneath her hair, a permanent reminder of the night she had fled. Thomas Blackwood's rage had finally turned to violence after she had refused his proposal for the final time. The wealthy merchant's son had never accepted rejection gracefully, but that night, with liquor fueling his entitlement, he had shown his true nature. She had escaped with her virtue intact but her security shattered. Once word spread of the incident, teaching positions at respectable Boston academies had mysteriously disappeared. Thomas's family had too much influence, too many connections. Their whispers had followed her, troubled girl, emotional problems, makes unfounded accusations against respected gentlemen. The Hargroves' advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence, a respectable position far from Boston, with employers who knew nothing of the rumors. She had sold nearly everything she owned to purchase the train ticket. And now here she was in a strange town, dependent on the word of a cowboy with guarded eyes and rough hands. Levi Quinn. Charlotte closed her eyes, recalling his face. Handsome in a weathered way, with features that seemed carved by wind and sun rather than genetics. His eyes were a startling blue against his tan skin, and though he couldn't be much older than she was, there was something in his gaze that spoke of hard-won experience. His manner had been reserved but not unkind, and when he'd helped her down from the wagon, his hands had been gentle despite their calluses. "I'll return for you at 9 tomorrow morning," he had said. "Mr. Blackwell will want to meet you before making any decisions." She had thanked him with the polite formality that had been drilled into her since childhood, maintaining the proper distance between a lady and a working man. But as he turned to leave, he had paused. "Miss Hayes," he'd said, "you should know the Blackwells are good people, hard but fair. If you're honest with them, they'll treat you right." Something in his tone had suggested a warning, or perhaps advice born of his own experience. Before she could respond, he had touched his hat brim and departed, leaving her to wonder what lay behind those careful words. Charlotte sighed and sat up, abandoning the pretense of sleep. She moved to the window, parting the faded curtains to gaze out at the unfamiliar landscape. Moonlight silvered the distant mountains and cast long shadows across the single dusty street that comprised most of Clearwater. So different from Boston's cobblestone streets and gas lamps, so empty, so vast. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Charlotte pushed it down with practiced determination. She had not come this far to surrender to panic. The frontier might be harsh, but it offered what Boston could not, a fresh beginning, unburdened by the past. "One day at a time," she whispered to herself, a mantra that had carried her through the darkest moments after her father's death, through her mother's decline, through Thomas's assault and the ruin of her reputation. Tomorrow she would meet Mr. Blackwell, she would secure this position. She would build a new life, stone by stone if necessary. And as for the enigmatic Levi Quinn with his wary eyes and unexpected kindness, he would be merely a footnote in the story of her arrival in Colorado territory, nothing more. Charlotte returned to the narrow bed, determined to rest regardless of whether sleep came. As exhaustion finally claimed her, her last coherent thought was that she had not felt truly safe in months, not until a stranger with sun-weathered skin and gentle hands had helped her from a train platform as the day's light faded into shadow. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the threadbare curtains. Charlotte rose early, washing with the cold water from the pitcher and dressing with particular care in her second-best traveling dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style, wanting to appear both capable and respectable for her meeting with Mr. Blackwell. Mrs. Keller, a stout widow with a no-nonsense manner, provided a breakfast of cornbread, bacon, and strong coffee. The other boarders, 2 miners and a clerk from the mercantile, eyed Charlotte with undisguised curiosity but maintained a respectful distance. "Mr. Quinn seems to think highly of you, Mrs. Keller remarked as she poured more coffee into Charlotte's cup. "Not like him to go out of his way for strangers." "He's been very kind," Charlotte replied carefully. "Do you know him well?" "Known him since he drifted into town 3 years back. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's reliable, steadiest hand at the Blackwell place." The older woman studied Charlotte thoughtfully. "The Blackwells run the largest cattle operation in the county. Decent folk. If they take you on as teacher for those girls, you could do worse." Charlotte nodded, absorbing this information. "The daughters, what can you tell me about them?" "Emma's 10, smart as a whip. Rebecca's 7, sweet-tempered but shy since her mother died 2 years ago. Mr. Blackwell does his best, but those girls need a woman's influence." Before Charlotte could inquire further, the sound of wagon wheels outside announced Levi's arrival. She gathered her reticule, heart beating a rapid cadence against her ribs. Everything depended on this meeting. Mrs. Keller walked her to the door. "Good luck, Miss Hayes, and mind yourself, the territory has different rules than Boston." Charlotte stepped onto the boardwalk, blinking in the bright mountain sunlight. Levi Quinn sat atop a wagon, his broad-brimmed hat shadowing his features. He wore the same practical attire as yesterday, denim trousers, a faded cotton shirt, leather vest, and boots that had seen many miles. A holstered revolver hung at his hip, a stark reminder that she had entered a different world. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he said, touching his hat brim. "Sleep well." "Well enough, thank you," she replied, noting how the morning light revealed flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I appreciate your returning as promised." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "A man's word means something out here." He climbed down and offered his hand. "Your trunk's already loaded, mister. Blackwell's expecting us." His hand was warm and solid as he helped her onto the wagon seat. Charlotte was acutely aware of the propriety boundaries she was crossing. Unmarried women in Boston did not travel unchaperoned with men, especially not men they had just met. But Boston's rules seemed distant and irrelevant compared to the immediate challenges before her. As they left the small settlement behind, the landscape opened dramatically, rolling hills giving way to vast pastures with the jagged mountains always looming on the horizon. The air was sharp and clean, scented with pine and sage. "It's beautiful," Charlotte murmured almost to herself. Levi glanced at her, seeming to assess the sincerity of her observation. "It can be. Can also be deadly if you don't respect it. You speak as though the land itself is alive. Out here it might as well be, has its own moods, its own justice." He handled the reins with casual expertise, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Winter comes early and stays late. Summer brings drought and lightning fires. Spring has floods. Territory doesn't forgive mistakes. Charlotte studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "Yet you choose to remain. Some men fit better in the wild than in civilization, Miss Hayes." There was a story there, she sensed, but it wasn't her place to pry. Instead, she asked about the ranch and the teaching position, gathering information to prepare for her meeting. "Mr. Blackwell built the ranch from nothing after the war," Levi explained. "Started with 20 head of cattle and a rundown cabin. Now he runs over 2,000 head on 30,000 acres. He's got 15 men working for him, including me. And Mrs. Blackwell died of fever 2 years back, hit him hard, hit the girls harder." Levi's voice softened slightly. "He tried bringing in a governess from Denver last year, but she couldn't handle the isolation. Left after 2 months." Charlotte's stomach tightened. "I see." Levi seemed to sense her unease. "You're made of sterner stuff, I think." The unexpected vote of confidence caught her off guard. "You can't possibly know that, Mr. Quinn." "I've met my share of people running from something, Miss Hayes." His gaze remained on the road ahead. "The ones who survive out here aren't necessarily the strongest. They're the ones who can adapt." Charlotte fell silent, unsettled by his perception. Did her eyes betray her desperation, or was Levi Quinn simply unusually observant? The wagon crested a gentle rise, and suddenly the Blackwell Ranch spread before them, a collection of sturdy log buildings nestled in a protected valley. A 2-story main house dominated the center, flanked by a large barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. Corrals and fenced pastures extended outward, with cattle dotting the distant hillsides. "Home," Levi said simply, guiding the horses down the slope. As they approached, Charlotte noted details that spoke of prosperity tempered by practical frontier sensibilities. The main house had glass windows and a proper shingled roof, but the construction was straightforward rather than ornate. A vegetable garden flourished behind a protective fence, and flowers bloomed in barrels near the front porch, signs of civilization carved from wilderness. A tall man emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard. His hair and beard were iron gray, his face weathered by sun and wind, but he moved with the vigor of someone younger than his apparent 50-plus years. "That's Jackson Blackwell," Levi said quietly. "Straightforward man, values honesty above all, tell it true with him and you'll do fine." Before Charlotte could respond, they had drawn to a halt. Levi set the brake and jumped down, coming around to help her descend. As his hands briefly encircled her waist, she was struck again by the contradiction of their strength and gentleness. "Mr. Blackwell," Levi called, "this is Miss Charlotte Hayes." The rancher approached, studying Charlotte with shrewd gray eyes. Miss Hayes, Levi tells me you came west expecting a position that's no longer available. Yes, sir, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. I was engaged as governess to the Hargrove children. I had no knowledge of their passing until Mr. Quinn informed me yesterday. Blackwell nodded. Sorry for your wasted journey. James was a good neighbor. He gestured toward the house. Come inside, we can talk more comfortably there. Charlotte followed him, aware of Levi remaining with the wagon. The interior of the house surprised her with its unexpected refinement: solid furniture, braided rugs, bookshelves filled with volumes. A piano stood in one corner of the large main room, sheet music open on its stand. My late wife's, Blackwell said, following her gaze to the instrument. Do you play, Miss Hayes? Yes, sir, it was part of my education at Kensington Academy. Sit down, please. He indicated a chair at the oak dining table. Charlotte sat, arranging her skirts carefully, conscious of making a good impression. Blackwell took a seat across from her, his manner direct but not unkind. Levi says you're qualified to teach my daughters. What exactly are your credentials? Charlotte outlined her education and the tutoring positions she had held in Boston, carefully omitting the circumstances of her departure. I can provide references from the academy, sir. That won't be necessary. Letters can be forged. I judge people by what I see. His gray eyes assessed her carefully. Why did you come west, Miss Hayes? Truth now. The bluntness of the question caught her off guard. Charlotte hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. I sought a fresh start, Mr. Blackwell, she said finally. My parents are deceased and there was an unfortunate situation with a gentleman that made remaining in Boston untenable. Blackwell's expression remained neutral. Were you compromised? Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. No, sir. I rejected his proposal multiple times. He became insistent. When I defended myself, his family used their influence to damage my reputation and employment prospects. She touched the scar at her temple briefly before she could stop herself. Blackwell's eyes followed the movement, and something in his expression shifted. I see. He was silent for a moment. My daughters need education and a woman's guidance. The position includes room, board, and $20 monthly. You'd have Sundays to yourself and be treated as family, not staff. In return, I expect dedication to the girls' development and adherence to proper moral standards. Charlotte's heart leaped. You're offering me the position. Conditionally. There's a small cabin behind the main house, used to be the foreman's before we built the new bunkhouse. It would be yours, giving you privacy while keeping you close enough for the girls. Try it for 1 month. If it suits all parties, we'll make a more permanent arrangement. Relief washed over her so powerfully that she had to press her hands together in her lap to hide their trembling. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. I would be honored to accept. He nodded once as if the matter was settled. The girls are with Mrs. Peterson today, rancher's wife, about 10 miles south. They'll be back tomorrow. That gives you time to settle in. He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. Levi will show you to the cabin and help with your trunk. As they walked outside, Charlotte struggled to contain her emotions. She had a position, shelter, security, at least temporarily. The knot of anxiety that had been her constant companion since leaving Boston loosened slightly. Levi was waiting by the wagon, his expression questioning. Blackwell gave him a nod. Miss Hayes will be staying. Get her settled in Catherine's cabin. Yes, sir. Levi's eyes met Charlotte's briefly, and she thought she detected approval there. As Blackwell strode toward the barn, Levi loaded her trunk onto his shoulder with surprising ease. This way, Miss Hayes. He led her along a well-worn path behind the main house to a small log cabin partially sheltered by tall pines. It was modest but sturdy, with a small porch and a single glass window facing the main house. It's not fancy, Levi said as he set down the trunk, but it's solid. No leaks, good stove. Catherine, our previous foreman's wife, planted those roses by the steps. The wild roses climbed up the cabin wall, their pink blooms adding unexpected beauty to the rustic structure. Charlotte approached the door, feeling a strange mix of trepidation and hope. The interior was simple: one main room with a small iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed with a colorful quilt. A curtained alcove revealed a washstand, and shelves lined one wall. It was smaller than her childhood bedroom in Boston, yet somehow it felt like more than she deserved after the desperate uncertainty of recent months. It's perfect, she said softly. Levi looked skeptical.
It's basic at best.
It's mine, Charlotte replied, running her hand over the smooth-worn surface of the table, at least for now. Something in her voice must have revealed more than she intended, because Levi's expression softened. I'll bring your other bags and some firewood. Pumps out back for water. Outhouse is behind those trees. He hesitated. Mrs. Peterson sent over some provisions yesterday, bread, preserves, coffee.
Should be in the cupboard there.
The thoughtfulness of these strangers overwhelmed her suddenly. Charlotte turned away, blinking rapidly to dispel the tears that threatened. Thank you, she managed, keeping her back to him until she had composed herself. Just doing what needs doing, Levi replied, his voice gruff. I'll be back with the rest of your things. When the door closed behind him, Charlotte sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to acknowledge how close she had come to complete disaster. If Levi Quinn hadn't approached her on that platform, if he hadn't mentioned the teaching position, if Mr. Blackwell hadn't been willing to take a chance on a stranger. By the time Levi returned with her valises, she had dried her eyes and was examining the stove, determined to appear capable rather than overwhelmed. Do you know how to light it? He asked, setting her bags down. Charlotte straightened, reluctantly admitting, not precisely this type, no. Without comment, Levi knelt and demonstrated, his movements efficient. Damper here controls the draft, too open and it'll burn too hot. Too closed and it'll smoke you out. Wood box there will need filling every day in winter. Charlotte watched carefully, knowing her comfort would depend on mastering these basic skills. I'm a quick learner, Mr. Quinn.
Good.
You'll need to be, he straightened, brushing his hands on his trousers. Winters here are harsh, summers brief. The girls will keep you busy, but the isolation gets to some people.
Especially those used to city life.
Are you warning me or challenging me, Mr. Quinn? Charlotte asked, a hint of steel entering her voice. The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment the carefully maintained distance in his eyes faltered, and Charlotte glimpsed something else, respect perhaps or curiosity. Neither, Miss Hayes, just stating facts. He moved toward the door. I should get back to work, Mr. Blackwell will expect you for supper at the main house, 6 o'clock. Mr. Quinn, Charlotte called as he reached for the door handle. When he turned, she continued, thank you. Not just for the assistance with the stove, but for everything since the station. You had no obligation to help me. Levi's expression remained unreadable. Out here, we help when help's needed. Might be us needing it next time. He touched his hat brim in farewell. Welcome to Blackwell Ranch, Miss Hayes. As the door closed behind him, Charlotte stood in the center of the small cabin, surrounded by her meager possessions and the unfamiliar silence of the Colorado wilderness. For the first time since boarding the train in Boston, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a place where she could start anew. Outside, the wild roses nodded in the mountain breeze, their petals catching the afternoon sunlight, delicate beauty thriving against the rough-hewn logs of her new home. Levi Quinn rode the fence line with mechanical precision, his body following the familiar routine while his mind wandered elsewhere. 3 weeks had passed since Charlotte Hayes had arrived at Blackwell Ranch, and against all expectations, she had not only endured but seemed to thrive. He'd watched from a distance as she established herself with quiet determination. The first week her hands had been raw from unaccustomed work, yet she never complained. By the second week, she had transformed the small cabin into a proper home, with wildflowers on the table and curtains fashioned from fabric misses. Peterson had given her. Most importantly, she had won over Emma and Rebecca Blackwell with a combination of gentle authority and genuine interest that even Levi could recognize as rare. The girls now followed her like eager puppies, soaking up knowledge in the mornings and helping with her chores in the afternoons. Even Jackson Blackwell seemed transformed, the perpetual grimness in his expression softening when Charlotte coaxed Rebecca to play a simple melody on the long silent piano, or when Emma proudly showed him the neat script in her copybook. Levi dismounted to repair a sagging section of wire, his hands working automatically while his thoughts continued their unwelcome path. He had no business thinking about Charlotte Hayes. No business noticing how the mountain sun had brought a golden glow to her skin, or how her formal Eastern speech had begun to relax around the ranch hands at Sunday dinners. No business remembering how her eyes crinkled when she laughed at Hank's exaggerated stories, or how gracefully she adapted to frontier life without surrendering her essential refinement. He drove a staple into the fence post with more force than necessary. The frontier was no place for the kind of thoughts he'd been having. Men like him, men with blood on their hands and darkness in their past, didn't deserve women like Charlotte Hayes. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled him from his brooding. He turned to see Blackwell riding toward him, his expression grim. "Problem, sir?" Levi asked, straightening. "Just got word from town. James Crawford's gang was spotted near Silverton 3 days ago. Robbed the bank there, killed 2 men." Blackwell's eyes were hard. "Sheriff thinks they might be headed this way." Levi's blood ran cold. James Crawford. The name alone was enough to resurrect memories best left buried. "Crawford's bold, crossing back into Colorado," he said carefully. "There's a bounty on him in 3 territories." "Bold or desperate?" Blackwell studied him. "You rode with him once."
What's your assessment?
The direct reference to his past was unusual. Blackwell had hired Levi 3 years ago knowing his background, but they rarely spoke of it. The rancher had given him a chance when others wouldn't, judging him by his actions rather than his history. "If it's really Crawford, he's not just passing through," Levi said finally. "He plans his moves carefully. Silverton could be a distraction." "That's what I thought," Blackwell nodded. "I want extra guards on the herd at night. And someone keeping an eye on the main house." The implication was clear. If Crawford was in the area, the ranch, with its valuable stock and remote location, made a tempting target. Worse, Crawford had a personal grudge against Levi. "If he learned his former riding partner was here, I'll organize the men," Levi promised. "Might be wise to limit trips to town for a while." "Already planned to, but there's a supply wagon coming tomorrow, and Miss Hayes needs to be on it." "She's got a list of books and things for the girls." Blackwell frowned. "I don't want to alarm her unnecessarily, but I won't send her unprotected either." "I'll escort her," Levi said, the words out before he could consider them. Blackwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're my best man with the herd." "Johnson can handle it for 1 day. Crawford knows me. If he's watching the ranch, better I'm with Miss Hayes than here." The logic was sound, though Levi suspected his motivations weren't entirely strategic. The thought of Charlotte encountering Crawford's gang made his chest tight with an emotion he refused to name. "All right," Blackwell agreed after a moment, "but keep your eyes open and your gun handy, and Quinn.
Sir.
Don't tell Miss Hayes why you're going. No need to frighten her yet." Levi nodded, though the instruction sat uneasily. Keeping Charlotte ignorant of potential danger seemed wrong, but it wasn't his place to question Blackwell's decisions regarding his household. As Blackwell rode away, Levi returned to mending the fence, his movements now sharp with tension. Crawford, the name conjured images of a charismatic leader whose charm masked a cold-blooded killer. Levi had ridden with his gang for 8 months after the war, young and angry and lost, before a raid on a homestead had opened his eyes to what he had become. The family, parents and 2 young children, had been murdered despite Crawford's promises of no unnecessary killing. Levi had left that night, riding hard through darkness with Crawford's bullets and curses following him. He'd wandered for years afterward, working ranch to ranch, trying to outrun his past until he'd landed at Blackwell Ranch and found something close to peace. If Crawford had tracked him here. The thought of what might happen to the ranch, to Blackwell, to the girls, to Charlotte, made his hand tighten on the fence pliers until his knuckles whitened. "Wool gathering, Mr. Quinn," a familiar voice called, startling him from his dark thoughts. Charlotte Hayes stood several yards away, a basket over her arm and Rebecca Blackwell at her side. The little girl clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, her shyness evident even at a distance. Levi quickly removed his hat, conscious of the sweat-dampened hair and trail dust that must cover him. "Miss Hayes, Miss Rebecca. What brings you ladies out this way?" Rebecca wanted to gather flowers for her father's birthday tomorrow, Charlotte explained, moving closer. "I remembered you mentioning that columbines grow near the west pasture." "There's a patch just over that rise," Levi confirmed, nodding toward a gentle slope. "Blue ones too, not just the usual red." Rebecca's eyes brightened. "Blue is Papa's favorite color." Charlotte smiled down at the child with obvious affection. "Then we shall find him the finest blue columbines in Colorado territory." The domesticity of the scene struck Levi with unexpected force. Charlotte in a simple blue dress with her hair secured in a practical braid, the little girl gazing up at her with adoration, the golden afternoon light surrounding them. It formed a picture of everything he had never allowed himself to want, knowing it could never be his. "Mr. Quinn, are you well?" Charlotte asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "You seem troubled." Levi forced himself to focus. Just thinking about work, Miss Hayes. He hesitated, then added, Mr. Blackwell mentioned you need to go to town tomorrow. I'll be escorting you. Oh, surprise flickered across her face. That's not necessary. I'm sure one of the supply wagon drivers. Mr. Blackwell's orders, Levi said firmly. There have been reports of trouble in the area, better safe than sorry. Charlotte's perceptive gaze sharpened. What kind of trouble? Before Levi could formulate a response that wouldn't alarm either her or Rebecca, the little girl tugged at Charlotte's skirt. Miss Hayes, can we find the blue flowers now? Before it gets dark. Charlotte's attention immediately shifted to her charge, though Levi noted the question and her eyes remained. Of course, dear Mr. Quinn, is the path safe for us to walk, no snakes or rough terrain. It's clear enough, he replied, but I can show you if you'd like. The offer surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Levi generally kept his distance from the main house and its occupants, preferring the straightforward company of cattle and horses to the complexities of human interaction. That would be lovely, Charlotte said after a moment. If you can spare the time. Levi glanced at the remaining fence section. It'll keep, let me get my horse. As he collected his gelding and fell into step beside Charlotte and Rebecca, Levi felt a strange dissonance. The peaceful scene, walking through wildflowers with a beautiful woman and a child gathering a birthday surprise, contrasted sharply with the danger Crawford's presence represented. These two worlds should never intersect, yet he had the sickening feeling they soon would. Have you lived in Colorado long, Mr. Quinn? Charlotte asked as they crested the hill, Rebecca running slightly ahead to examine a butterfly. About 5 years now, he answered, deliberately vague, and before that. Levi hesitated, here and there, Texas for a while, New Mexico territory. Charlotte seemed to sense his reluctance. I don't mean to pry. It's just that you know so much about me, yet I know very little about you. Not much to know, he said, his voice more gruff than intended, just a ranch hand. I think there's considerably more to you than that, she replied quietly. But I respect your privacy. The simple acceptance in her tone made him glance at her, catching an expression of genuine interest rather than the judgment he expected. For a brief, dangerous moment, Levi found himself wanting to tell her everything. About the war that had broken something essential in him, about the mistakes he'd made afterward, about the redemption he'd been seeking ever since. Instead, he pointed ahead. There are your columbines. Rebecca's delighted cry saved him from further conversation as she discovered the patch of delicate blue wildflowers nodding in the breeze. Charlotte moved to help the child select the best blooms, kneeling in the grass without concern for her skirts. Levi stood apart, leading his horse and watching them. The gentle way Charlotte guided Rebecca's small hands, showing her how to cut the stems without damaging the plants. The patience with which she answered the girl's rapid questions. The genuine delight she took in Rebecca's excitement. In Boston, women like Charlotte Hayes married successful businessmen or professionals. They didn't end up on remote ranches teaching ranchers' daughters and talking to scarred cowboys with blood-soaked pasts. The sooner he remembered that, the better. Mr. Quinn, Rebecca called, breaking into his thoughts. Look what we found. She held up not a flower but a perfect blue jay feather, her small face alight with triumph. That's a fine find, Miss Rebecca, he replied, moving closer. Blue jays are clever birds. Some say finding their feathers brings good luck. Really? The child's eyes widened. Then you should have it for your hat. For good luck. Before Levi could protest, Rebecca was pressing the feather into his calloused hand, her expression earnest. That's very generous of you, he said softly, genuinely touched by the unexpected gift. Put it in your hatband, she insisted, like the cowboys in my book. Levi complied, tucking the bright feather into the weathered leather band of his Stetson. Rebecca beamed with satisfaction. It suits you, Charlotte said, her voice warm with amusement and something else he couldn't quite identify. Their eyes met over Rebecca's head, and for a suspended moment, Levi allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where a man with his history might deserve the gentle approval in Charlotte Hayes' gaze. Then Rebecca spotted another butterfly, breaking the moment as she darted after it with childish enthusiasm. We should start back, Charlotte said, gathering her basket. Mr. Blackwell will worry if we're late for supper. Levi nodded, mentally shaking himself. I'll see you safely to the main house. As they walked back, Rebecca skipping ahead with her precious flowers, Charlotte moved closer to Levi. "What trouble were you referring to earlier?" she asked quietly, "when you mentioned escorting me to town." Levi considered his answer carefully, respecting Blackwell's wishes while honoring his own instinct that Charlotte deserved some warning. "There are reports of outlaws in the area," he said finally. "Probably nothing to worry about, but Mr. Blackwell prefers caution." Charlotte studied his face. "You're not telling me everything." Her perception was unsettling. "It's not my place to alarm you unnecessarily." "Mr. Quinn," she said firmly, "I may be new to the frontier, but I'm not a child to be protected from difficult truths. If there's danger, I need to know, not just for myself, but for the girl's safety." The reasonableness of her argument swayed him. The outlaw band is led by a man named James Crawford. He's dangerous, unpredictable. The sheriff thinks they might pass through this area. Charlotte absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. "I see, and is there some specific reason Mr. Blackwell is concerned? Surely outlaws are not uncommon in the territories." Levi hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. Crawford has a history with this region, knows the ranches, the terrain. Makes him more of a threat than your average bandit. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. I'll be vigilant without alarming the girls." After a pause, she added, "And I appreciate the escort to town tomorrow, truly." As they approached the main house, Levi felt a complex tangle of emotions he couldn't unravel. Concern for Charlotte's safety, admiration for her steady response to potential danger, and underneath it all, a growing awareness that Charlotte Hayes was becoming important to him in ways that could only lead to pain. Rebecca ran ahead to show her father the flowers, leaving Charlotte and Levi alone for a moment at the edge of the yard. "Until tomorrow then, Mr. Quinn," Charlotte said, offering a small smile. "Shall we leave after breakfast?" 8 o'clock, he confirmed. "We'll take the wagon, should be back before dark." She nodded and turned to go, then paused. "The feather does suit you, by the way. You should wear it more often." Before Levi could respond, she was walking away, her slender figure silhouetted against the golden evening light of the ranch house windows. He stood watching long after she disappeared inside, one hand unconsciously touching the blue jay feather in his hatband. Tomorrow he would escort Charlotte Hayes to town, keeping her safe from threats she only partially understood. He would maintain the proper distance between them, remember the blood on his hands, and ignore the dangerous warmth her presence kindled in his chest. But for tonight, just for tonight, Levi Quinn allowed himself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The journey to Clearwater began in companionable silence, the wagon rolling smoothly along the well-worn trail as morning sun filtered through the ponderosa pines. Charlotte had dressed practically for the trip in a sturdy brown skirt and cream shirtwaist, her chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a modest straw hat. Beside her, Levi handled the reins with casual expertise, his presence simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. "Rebecca was quite concerned about your welfare this morning," Charlotte remarked as they emerged from a shaded section of trail into bright sunlight. Levi glanced at her, eyebrows raised. "Was she?" "Indeed, she made me promise to remind you to wear the lucky feather." Charlotte smiled at the memory of the child's earnest instructions. "She has quite decided you're her personal hero after you rescued that kitten from the hayloft last week." The hint of color that touched Levi's tanned cheek surprised her. "Any of the hands would have done the same." "Perhaps, but you were the one who climbed up after it, despite your dislike of heights." His startled expression confirmed her observation. Charlotte had noticed how he tensed when working on the barn roof, how he always found reasons to stay on solid ground when others climbed. "You're observant, Miss Hayes," he said after a moment. "Teachers must be. Children reveal much through small gestures and unconscious habits." She paused, then added more softly, "as do adults." Levi's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "And what have you observed about me then?" The question held a challenge Charlotte hadn't expected. She considered her answer carefully. "You're kind but prefer not to be noticed for it. You watch everything but reveal little. You treat animals with gentleness and respect." She hesitated, then finished honestly, "And you carry a burden of some kind, one you believe defines you." The silence that followed was heavy. Charlotte feared she had overstepped, prying into matters he clearly preferred to keep private. "I apologize," she said quickly. "That was presumptuous of me." "No," Levi's voice was quiet but steady. It was accurate. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. You see more clearly than most, Miss Hayes. Before she could respond, he changed the subject. We'll reach town in about an hour. The supply wagon should already be at the general store. Best if we complete our business efficiently and start back early. Charlotte recognized the deliberate shift away from personal matters. Of course, I have my list prepared. She patted the reticule in her lap. Mr. Blackwell was most generous in approving books and materials for the girl's education. He values learning, Levi said. Never had much schooling himself, but he knows its worth. They lapsed into silence again, though it felt less strained now. Charlotte found herself stealing glances at her companion, noting how the blue jay feather added an unexpected touch of whimsy to his otherwise practical appearance. There was something compelling about the contrast between his evident physical strength and the care with which he treated those more vulnerable than himself. She had observed him these past weeks, his patience with the younger ranch hands, his gentle handling of even the most obstinate livestock, the respect he showed to everyone regardless of position. Whatever shadows darkened his past, Levi Quinn was fundamentally a good man. Charlotte had encountered too few of those to mistake one when she saw him. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Clearwater came into view in the valley below, still small but growing, with new buildings under construction at the northern edge of town. The stagecoach now stopped twice weekly instead of once, bringing mail and occasional passengers. Town's changed even in the 3 weeks since I arrived, Charlotte remarked. Silver strikes in the mountains are bringing people, Levi replied. Mr. Blackwell says we'll see real growth once the railroad spur comes through next year.
Do you think that's a good thing, the growth? Levi considered this.
Brings conveniences, doctor might actually stay, better supplies, but it also brings trouble sometimes, men looking for quick fortunes rather than honest work. His gaze swept the surrounding hillsides as he spoke, an unconscious gesture that reminded Charlotte of his concerns about outlaws. She found herself scanning the landscape too, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was looking for. You're worried about Crawford, she said quietly. Levi's jaw tightened, just being cautious, probably nothing. But his hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, confirming her suspicions. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, determined not to add to his concerns by appearing frightened. Well, I for one am looking forward to exploring the mercantile, she said with deliberate brightness. Rebecca has outgrown her boots, and Emma desperately needs more paper for her drawings. Levi's expression softened slightly. The girls are flourishing with you, Mr. Blackwell has noticed. The simple acknowledgement warmed Charlotte more than it should have. They're wonderful children, so eager to learn despite their losses. Like someone else I know, Levi said quietly, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to the trail. The unexpected compliment left Charlotte momentarily speechless. Levi rarely made personal comments, maintaining careful formality in their interactions. This glimpse behind his reserve felt significant, though she couldn't have explained why. They reached town without incident, the bustle of midday Clearwater a stark contrast to the ranch's peaceful routine. Horses and wagons lined the main street, and the saloon was doing brisk business despite the early hour. New faces mixed with familiar ones as miners and travelers passed through. Levi helped Charlotte down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. General store first, he suggested, securing the horses to a hitching post.
Yes, please, then the bookshop if there's time.
As they crossed the dusty street, Charlotte was acutely aware of the glances they attracted. A beautiful Eastern woman accompanied by one of Blackwell's cowboys was evidently worthy of notice in a small frontier town.
She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to be unsettled by the attention.
The mercantile was crowded, filled with ranchers' wives stocking up on supplies and miners purchasing equipment. Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, greeted them warmly. Miss Hayes, a pleasure to see you again. And Quinn, good to see you too. He gestured toward a mountain of crates. Mr. Blackwell's supplies are all ready, just awaiting payment.
I'll handle that, Levi said. Miss Hayes has her own shopping to do.
While Levi dealt with the ranch supplies, Charlotte made her way through the store, selecting items from her list. Boots for Rebecca, paper and pencils for Emma, a few necessities for her own cabin. As she examined fabric for new curtains, a conversation from nearby caught her attention. Saying the Crawford gang hit a stage just outside Silverton, a woman's voice said, hushed but audible.
Killed the driver and took everything.
My husband says the sheriff's organizing a posse, another woman replied. But Crawford's got at least 10 men with him, dangerous business. I heard he's looking for someone, the first woman continued. Some man who crossed him years back, swore he'd find him and make him pay. Charlotte's hands stilled on the fabric, her heartbeat quickening. She glanced toward Levi, who was deep in conversation with Mr. Peterson, seemingly unaware of the women's talk. Something about their words disturbed her deeply, though she couldn't articulate why. She completed her selections quickly, paying for her items and rejoining Levi near the front of the store. All finished, he asked, taking the parcels from her arms. Yes, just the bookshop remains. Outside, the street seemed more crowded than before. A group of rough-looking men had gathered outside the saloon, their loud voices carrying across the street. Levi's posture stiffened as he noticed them. Perhaps we should load these purchases first, he suggested, his tone casual but his eyes alert. Charlotte nodded, understanding his caution. They crossed to the wagon, Levi's body positioned slightly between her and the saloon crowd. As he loaded her parcels, she caught fragments of the men's conversation, something about silver claims and cheating partners. Ordinary miners, Levi said quietly, noting her attention, not Crawford's men. How can you tell? Crawford's gang is more disciplined. These are just prospectors with too much whiskey and not enough sense. The certainty in his voice raised questions Charlotte wasn't sure she should ask. How did he know such details about these outlaws? The bookshop isn't far, she said instead, just down the street. Levi hesitated, clearly reluctant to move further from the wagon. I'll come with you. The small bookshop was a haven of quiet after the mercantile's bustle. Shelves lined the walls, filled with a surprising variety of volumes for such a remote location. The proprietor, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Charlotte like an old friend despite having met her only once before. Miss Hayes, I set aside those primers you inquired about. And I've just received a shipment from Denver, several titles you might find interesting for your young ladies. While Charlotte examined his recommendations, Levi stationed himself near the window, his attention divided between the street outside and the conversation within. The contrast between the peaceful literary discussion and his vigilant posture struck Charlotte forcefully. The danger he perceived was real to him, whatever its actual proximity. She selected several books for the girl's education, plus a volume of frontier poetry she thought Emma might enjoy, and a collection of illustrated natural history for Rebecca's budding interest in animals. And for yourself, Miss Hayes, the bookseller inquired. Surely a lady of your education requires intellectual stimulation as well. Charlotte hesitated. Personal purchases seemed indulgent when Mr. Blackwell was being so generous with educational materials, yet the thought of fresh reading material for her solitary evenings was tempting. Perhaps something light, she conceded. Might I suggest this? He presented a slender volume. Poetry by a promising new writer from Massachusetts, quite popular with Eastern ladies, I understand. Charlotte examined the book, opening to a random page. The verse was surprisingly good, vivid imagery describing the vast American landscape, the meeting of civilization and wilderness, the beauty found in unexpected places. One poem in particular caught her eye, titled simply Frontiers. It spoke of internal boundaries as challenging as physical ones, of courage found in quiet moments rather than dramatic stands. I'll take it, she decided, adding it to her stack. As the bookseller wrapped her purchases in brown paper, Charlotte noticed Levi's attention had fixed on something outside. His posture had tensed, his hand moving subtly toward his hip. Mr. Quinn, she asked quietly, moving closer. 3 riders just came into town, he said, his voice low. Don't recognize them. Is that unusual? New faces come through all the time, but these men, he trailed off, eyes narrowing. Let's finish our business and get back to the ranch. Charlotte quickly paid for the books, thanking the proprietor for his assistance. As they stepped outside, the atmosphere in the street seemed to have shifted. The miners outside the saloon had fallen silent, watching the newcomers who had stopped their horses near the sheriff's office. The 3 men were trail-worn and heavily armed, with the hard eyes of those accustomed to violence. One, a tall man with a shock of graying hair beneath his black hat, seemed to be their leader. As Charlotte and Levi emerged from the bookshop, his gaze swept the street and briefly locked with Levi's. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or assessment. Then the man turned away, speaking quietly to his companions. Levi, Charlotte whispered, the formal Mr. Quinn forgotten in her sudden unease. Walk to the wagon, he said, his voice calm but with an underlying tension she'd never heard before.
Don't hurry, don't look back.
Charlotte clutched her wrapped books tightly as they moved down the boardwalk. The back of her neck prickled with the sensation of being watched. Levi's hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching but ready to guide or protect. They had nearly reached the wagon when shouts erupted from the saloon. A fight had broken out among the miners, spilling into the street in a tangle of cursing men. The distraction drew all eyes, including those of the three newcomers. Now, Levi said, his hand finally closing around Charlotte's arm as he quickened their pace. They reached the wagon, and Levi helped her up with more haste than courtesy before swinging aboard himself. As he released the brake and took up the reins, Charlotte glanced back toward the sheriff's office. The tall stranger was watching them, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. "Are those Crawford's men?" she asked as the wagon rolled forward. "No," Levi replied, his voice tight. "Bounty hunters, I think."
Bounty hunters looking for Crawford. Maybe his knuckles were white on the reins. Or anyone else with a price on their head.
Charlotte processed this, connecting fragments of conversation and observation. The women in the store mentioning someone Crawford was seeking, Levi's detailed knowledge of the outlaw gang. The way he'd tensed when the stranger's eyes met his. "Levi," she said carefully, "who exactly is James Crawford to you?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I rode with his gang for 8 months after the war." The admission struck Charlotte like a physical blow. She had known Levi carried secrets, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "You were an outlaw," she said, the words strange on her tongue. Levi kept his eyes on the road ahead, his profile hard in the afternoon light.
"Yes, but you left."
After they murdered a family, parents and 2 children, Crawford had promised no killing, but he lied, always did. His jaw tightened. "I rode out that night," Crawford shot at me as I left.
"Swore he'd find me someday."
Charlotte struggled to reconcile this revelation with the man she had come to know. The gentle caretaker of injured animals, the patient teacher of young ranch hands, the man who had rescued her at the train station when he had no obligation to do so. "Does Mr. Blackwell know?" Levi nodded once, told him everything when he hired me, said a man's past matters less than what he chooses to do with his future. His voice roughened.
"He gave me a chance when no one else would."
They had cleared the town now, the wagon picking up speed on the open trail. Levi continuously checked behind them, though there was no sign of pursuit. "Those men in town," Charlotte said, understanding dawning, "they might be looking for you, not just Crawford. Possibly there was a bounty posted after I left the gang, $500, his mouth twisted.
Blood money for a deserter.
Charlotte processed this, fitting together pieces of the puzzle that was Levi Quinn, his reluctance to speak of his past, his hypervigilance, the sense of unworthiness that seemed to haunt him.
"Is that why you stay at the ranch?" she asked. "For protection?"
At first maybe, then because it became home. He finally looked at her, something vulnerable beneath the hardness in his eyes.
"I don't expect you to understand."
But Charlotte did understand with surprising clarity. "You're not that man anymore." "Aren't I?" The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "The blood doesn't wash away, Miss Hayes."
"The choices I made can't be unmade."
"No," she agreed quietly, "but they can be balanced by the choices you make now, every day. The man who helped me at the train station, who teaches Rebecca to ride and shows Emma how to track animals, that's who you are now." Levi said nothing, his attention returning to the trail and the potential dangers behind them. Charlotte fell silent too, watching the familiar landscape pass as they headed home to Blackwell Ranch. Home, a word she hadn't expected to associate with the remote Colorado outpost so quickly. The revelation of Levi's past should have frightened her. Instead, it filled in the outline of a man she had been trying to understand since their first meeting. His caution now made sense, his skills with weapons, his understanding of outlaws and their ways. These weren't merely frontier necessities, but the legacy of a life he had chosen to leave behind. As the wagon crested a rise giving them a clear view behind, Levi finally relaxed slightly. No one following.
"We should make the ranch by sundown."
"What will you do?" Charlotte asked, "if Crawford is truly looking for you?" Levi's expression hardened. "Keep the ranch safe, Mr. Blackwell. The girls, they're innocent in this."
"I won't let my past touch them." And yourself. His shrug held a fatalism that chilled her. I've been living on borrowed time for years, Miss Hayes. Charlotte, she said suddenly, after everything you've shared, surely we can dispense with formalities. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Charlotte, then, he seemed to taste the name, giving it a warmth she hadn't heard before. It suits you. The simple comment shouldn't have affected her so deeply, yet Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you for telling me the truth, about Crawford, about your past. You didn't have to. You deserve to know what kind of man you've been, friendly with. The hesitation suggested he'd considered and rejected other words. Especially with danger possibly approaching. Charlotte studied his profile, the straight nose, the firm jaw, the eyes that had seen too much for a man of only 25. I believe I've been friendly with a good man who made mistakes in his youth, as have we all. Some mistakes cost more than others, he replied, but his tone had softened. They continued in companionable silence for a time, the tension gradually easing as the miles between them and town increased. Charlotte found herself wondering what might have become of Levi Quinn in a different world, one where the war hadn't shattered so many young men, where desperation hadn't driven him to outlaw trails. What will you tell Mr. Blackwell, she asked eventually, about the men in town? Everything, Levi replied without hesitation. He needs to be prepared, we all do. Though we included her, Charlotte realized. Despite his instinct to protect, Levi was treating her as someone capable of handling difficult truths. The respect implied in this simple inclusion meant more than elaborate courtesies ever could. I won't say anything to the girls, she promised. They've known enough fear already. Levi nodded, gratitude evident in his expression. As the wagon rounded a bend, Blackwell Ranch came into view in the distance, smoke rising peacefully from the main house chimney. The sight of it, so tranquil against the backdrop of mountains, struck Charlotte with its fragility. This haven they had both found could be shattered by violence from the past. It will be all right, she said softly, as much to reassure herself as him. Levi glanced at her, his blue eyes serious in the late afternoon light. I hope you're right. But as they approached the ranch, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful existence hung by a thread, and that somewhere in the vast Colorado landscape, forces were gathering that would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The following days passed in a strange suspension between normalcy and tension. Outwardly, life at Blackwell Ranch continued its familiar rhythms, cattle to tend, lessons to teach, meals to prepare. But underneath ran a current of vigilance that Charlotte felt in every cautious glance toward the horizon, every extra rifle distributed among the hands, every whispered conversation that ceased when she or the girls approached. Levi had spoken with Blackwell immediately upon their return from town, the two men closeted in the ranch office for over an hour. When they emerged, Blackwell's face had been grim, and new orders had quickly spread among the ranch hands. No one rode alone, the herd was kept close, night guards were doubled. Charlotte maintained the children's routine, understanding that structure provided security. Yet she found herself watching the tree line during their outdoor lessons, starting at unexpected sounds, keeping the girls closer to the main house than usual. Rebecca and Emma, sensitive to adult moods despite efforts to shield them, grew quieter, their play more subdued. On the fourth morning after the town visit, Charlotte was gathering eggs in the henhouse when a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned to find Levi standing there, his expression troubled. "Good morning," she said, straightening. "Is everything all right?" "Patrol found tracks this morning," he replied without preamble. "About 8 riders skirting our north boundary. They're watching the ranch." Charlotte's hand tightened on the egg basket. Crawford. "Can't be certain, but it fits his pattern." Levi stepped closer, lowering his voice though no one else was nearby. "Mr. Blackwell's sending Emma and Rebecca to his sister's place in Denver. Stagecoach leaves Clearwater at noon." Today, Charlotte couldn't hide her dismay, but they'll be frightened, a proper goodbye. "There's no time," Levi cut in gently. "If Crawford's men are watching, better they don't know the girls are leaving. 2 of our most trusted hands will escort them all the way to Denver." Charlotte nodded slowly, understanding the logic even as her heart ached for the children. "What should I tell them?" "That they're going for a short visit to their aunt. Pack light, just what looks normal for a brief trip." His eyes held hers. "Mr. Blackwell wants you to go with them." "Me?" Charlotte blinked in surprise. "But my place is here." "Your place is safely away from whatever's coming," Levi corrected, his jaw set stubbornly. Crawford's men won't distinguish between ranch hands and teachers if they decide to move against us. Charlotte set the egg basket down carefully. I won't be sent away like a child, Levi. I understand the risk. Do you? His voice hardened. These men don't just rob, Charlotte, they kill, and they take particular pleasure in hurting women. All the more reason the girls need me with them, she countered. They'll be terrified otherwise, and what of Mr. Blackwell? He needs every capable hand here. Levi raked a hand through his hair in frustration. You're not trained for this kind of fight. Neither were you once, she pointed out. We all must learn to face what comes. His expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through his controlled exterior. I can't protect you and the ranch both. The admission, so honest, so raw, caught Charlotte off guard. In those words she heard what he wasn't saying, that her safety mattered to him personally, beyond his general duty to the ranch. I'm not asking you to protect me, she said more gently. But I won't abandon my home at the first sign of trouble. Home, the word hung between them, weighted with significance. In just over a month, Blackwell Ranch had indeed become her home in ways Boston never truly had been. Levi studied her face, seeming to search for something. Whatever he saw there made him sigh in resignation. Mr. Blackwell won't like it. Then I shall speak with him myself, Charlotte replied firmly. But first, let me help prepare the girls for their journey. Levi nodded, then reached out impulsively to touch her arm. Be careful, Charlotte. Please. The simple contact, the genuine concern in his voice, these affected her more deeply than flowery declarations ever could have. For a moment, they stood connected by that light touch, the henhouse fading away around them. I will, she promised softly. The moment broke as a ranch hand called Levi's name from outside. He withdrew his hand reluctantly, the mask of efficiency sliding back into place. I need to check the north pasture fence. Johnson thought he saw someone tampering with it yesterday. He moved toward the door, then paused. The girls will be looking for you, best break the news gently. After he left, Charlotte leaned against the rough wooden wall, taking a moment to compose herself. The danger was real, she understood that completely. Yet the thought of fleeing to Denver while the ranch faced an unknown threat felt wrong on a fundamental level. She gathered the eggs and headed toward the main house, rehearsing how to explain the sudden trip to the girls. As she crossed the yard, Charlotte noticed increased activity, men checking weapons, moving supplies, speaking in low, urgent tones. The atmosphere had shifted from cautious to grimly expectant. Inside the house, she found Rebecca and Emma at the breakfast table, Mr. Blackwell standing nearby with an expression Charlotte had never seen before, fear carefully controlled for his daughter's benefit. Miss Hayes, he said, relief evident in his voice. The girls need to pack for a journey. Would you assist them? Of course, Charlotte set down the egg basket and smiled at the children. We're going to prepare for a special visit to your Aunt Margaret in Denver. Won't that be exciting? Emma at 10 looked suspicious. Why so suddenly? You said we had lessons planned all week. Sometimes plans must change, Charlotte replied, keeping her tone light. Your aunt has been wanting to see you, and your father thinks this is a perfect time for a visit. Rebecca's lower lip trembled. Are you coming with us, Miss Hayes? Charlotte glanced at Blackwell, whose expression hardened. Miss Hayes will remain here, he said firmly. Tom and Will shall escort you safely to your aunt. No, Rebecca cried, jumping up to clutch Charlotte's skirts. I won't go without you. Charlotte knelt, gathering the child close. Sweetheart, your father needs me here, and you'll have such adventures in the city. When you return, you can tell me all about them. Emma watched with the solemn understanding of a child who had already experienced too much loss. It's because of the bad men, isn't it? I heard the cowboys talking. Blackwell sighed heavily. Emma. I'm not a baby, Papa, the girl interrupted. I know something's wrong. Everyone's worried. Charlotte met Blackwell's gaze over the girls' heads, seeing his struggle. Perhaps, she suggested gently, the truth simply told would be best. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. Girls, some dangerous men might be coming to the ranch. I need to know you're safe with Aunt Margaret while we handle the situation. Rebecca's eyes widened, like when Mama got sick and we had to stay with Mrs. Peterson. Something like that, Blackwell agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Just temporary. Will you be all right, Papa? Emma asked, suddenly looking very young despite her earlier maturity. Blackwell crossed to his daughters, kneeling to embrace them both. I will be fine, we all will. But I need to know my brave girls are safe so I can focus on protecting our home. His gaze met Charlotte's over the children's heads, a silent message passing between them. Later, she knew he would challenge her decision to stay. But for now, they were united in comforting the girls. "Let's pack your things," Charlotte suggested, gently disengaging Rebecca from her father's embrace. "We want you to have everything you need for your visit." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity, selecting clothing, packing small treasures, reassuring tearful children. Charlotte worked efficiently while maintaining a cheerful facade that grew increasingly difficult to sustain. The thought of the girls traveling even with trusted escorts filled her with anxiety, yet she understood the necessity. As they finished packing, Levi appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Wagons ready, Mr. Blackwell." Charlotte felt a surge of panic. So soon, but of course, every minute the children remained at the ranch was another minute of danger. "Girls," Blackwell said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "it's time to go." Rebecca burst into fresh tears, clinging to Charlotte. "Please come with us, please." Charlotte held the child tightly, fighting her own emotions. "I can't, sweetheart, but I'll be here when you return, I promise." Emma approached more solemnly, her young face set in lines too mature for her years. "Take care of Papa and Mr. Quinn," she whispered as Charlotte embraced her. "And yourself." "I will," Charlotte promised, brushing back the girl's dark hair. "Be brave for your sister Emma, she needs your strength." Outside, two ranch hands waited with a covered wagon, rifles prominently displayed. Charlotte helped the girls aboard, tucking blankets around them despite the summer warmth. Blackwell spoke quietly to the men, final instructions delivered with intensity. Levi stood slightly apart, scanning the surrounding landscape with vigilant eyes. When Charlotte approached him, he turned, his expression softening slightly. "They'll be safer in Denver," he said quietly. "I know." Charlotte watched as Blackwell embraced his daughters one final time. "It's still breaking his heart to send them away." Better heartbreak than Levi stopped himself, but Charlotte understood the unspoken alternative. "Mr. Blackwell won't be pleased that I've chosen to stay," she said, changing the subject. "No," Levi agreed, "but he respects courage." After a pause, he added, "So do I." Before Charlotte could respond, Blackwell joined them, his face composed but his eyes haunted as he watched the wagon begin to move. "They're good men," Levi assured him. "They'll get the girls to Denver safely." Blackwell nodded once sharply. "Make sure the north pasture is secure. I want extra guards on the herd tonight." As Levi moved away to carry out these instructions, Blackwell turned to Charlotte. "We need to talk, Miss Hayes." "Yes, sir," she replied steadily. "I imagine we do." They walked toward the main house in silence, Charlotte bracing herself for the confrontation to come. Inside, Blackwell led her to his office, a room she had rarely entered. Maps of the ranch lands covered one wall, a solid desk dominated the center, and bookshelves lined with practical volumes on cattle, land management, and territorial law filled another wall. It was a room designed for work rather than comfort. "Why did you refuse to go with the girls?" Blackwell asked without preamble, standing behind his desk rather than sitting. Charlotte clasped her hands before her, meeting his gaze directly. "Because I believe I can be of more use here." "More use?" His eyebrows rose. "Miss Hayes, we're preparing for a possible attack by violent men. This isn't a place for." "A woman," she supplied when he hesitated. "Mr. Blackwell, I may not be able to shoot like your men, but I can load rifles, tend wounds, maintain the household so others can focus on defense. I'm not helpless." "I never suggested you were." Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "But the danger is real. Crawford's men are ruthless." "If they attack, then one more capable pair of hands will be valuable," Charlotte finished firmly. "I didn't come west seeking an easy life, Mr. Blackwell. I came seeking purpose. I've found it here not just in teaching your daughters, but in being part of this ranch, this community." Blackwell studied her, his expression unreadable. "Quinn told you about his history with Crawford." It wasn't a question, but Charlotte nodded. "Yes." "And that doesn't concern you, being in proximity to a man with such a past." Charlotte considered her answer carefully. "The man Levi was and the man he is now seem vastly different to me. I judge him by his actions since I've known him, not by mistakes made years ago." Something shifted in Blackwell's expression, approval perhaps, or confirmation of a suspicion. "You've grown fond of him." The direct observation caught Charlotte off guard.
Had her feelings for Levi become so transparent, she had barely admitted them to herself, the gradual transformation of gratitude into respect, respect into admiration, admiration into something deeper and more complex. "I've grown fond of everyone at Blackwell Ranch," she replied carefully. "It's become my home." Blackwell accepted this diplomatic answer with a slight nod. "Very well, Miss Hayes, you may stay. But you will follow orders without question if danger approaches. Is that understood?"
"Yes, sir."
"And you'll remain primarily in the main house. We'll move your things from the cabin today."
"It's too isolated to be defensible."
Charlotte hadn't considered this practical aspect. "Of course, whatever you think best." Blackwell moved toward the window, gazing out at the ranch yard where men continued preparations. "I built this place from nothing after the war," he said quietly. "Lost my brother establishing it, nearly lost my own life more than once. Then Sarah," he paused, composing himself. "I won't lose it to Crawford or any man." "You won't," Charlotte said with more confidence than she felt. "The ranch is well defended." Blackwell turned back to her, his expression grim. "Crawford doesn't fight fairly, Miss Hayes. He uses deception, betrayal, whatever gives him advantage. That's what makes him dangerous." He studied her face. "Quinn believes he's the target, that Crawford's grudge is personal."
"Is it?"
"Partly, perhaps. But Crawford's primary motivation has always been profit. He wouldn't commit this many men just for revenge." Blackwell shook his head. "No, he's after the ranch itself, the cattle, the horses.
Assets he can convert to cash quickly."
The cold calculation behind this assessment chilled Charlotte. Then why hasn't he attacked already? His men have been watching for days. "He's waiting for something or someone," Blackwell's jaw tightened. "That's what worries me most." Before Charlotte could inquire further, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Blackwell moved swiftly to the door, Charlotte following close behind. In the ranch yard, several hands had gathered around Levi and another cowboy who had just ridden in hard, his horse lathered with exertion. "What is it?" Blackwell demanded as they approached. "Riders coming up from the south," the winded cowboy reported. 8, maybe 10, heavily armed, moving fast. Levi's eyes met Charlotte's briefly before returning to Blackwell. Could be Crawford. Or could be the bounty hunters from town with reinforcements. "Either way, we prepare the same," Blackwell decided. "Miss Hayes inside, now men to your positions." As the ranch hands dispersed with practiced efficiency, Charlotte hesitated. "Is there nothing I can do?" "Stay safe," Levi said quietly, checking his revolver. "That's what you can do." Before she could protest, he had moved away, calling orders to the younger hands. Blackwell guided Charlotte firmly toward the house, his expression brooking no argument. "In the root cellar if shooting starts," he instructed. "It's the most protected place." Inside, Charlotte moved to the window, watching as men took defensive positions around the buildings. The atmosphere had transformed completely, the working ranch suddenly a fortress preparing for siege. The reality of the danger struck her with new force as she observed Blackwell's men distributing ammunition, barricading doors, positioning themselves behind walls and fences with clear lines of fire. Through the window she could see Levi directing the youngest hands, his manner calm but authoritative. Whatever his past, in this moment he was clearly a leader the others respected. He moved with purpose, checking positions, adjusting strategies, his experience in such situations evident. Charlotte pressed her hand against the glass, a wordless gesture of concern. As if sensing her gaze, Levi looked toward the house, his eyes finding hers unerringly across the distance. For a suspended moment they remained connected, sharing something beyond words or physical proximity. Then he turned away, continuing his preparations as the distant sound of approaching riders grew steadily louder in the Colorado afternoon. The riders appeared first as a dust cloud on the horizon, then gradually resolved into individual figures as they approached, a line of mounted men moving with purpose rather than haste. They halted just beyond rifle range, clearly visible but maintaining a calculated distance. From her vantage point at the window, Charlotte counted 9 men, all armed and trail-worn. Their leader was instantly recognizable, the tall figure with iron-gray hair she had seen in Clearwater. Even at this distance, there was something commanding about his presence, an authority that seemed to extend beyond physical intimidation. Blackwell stood in the center of the yard, flanked by 4 of his most trusted hands, including Levi. They presented a united front, armed but not actively threatening, defending rather than provoking. The tension in the air was palpable even through the glass. Charlotte strained to hear the exchange but caught only fragments, Blackwell's steady voice carrying occasionally on the breeze, the responses from the strangers too distant to discern. After several minutes of this standoff, a single rider separated from the main group, advancing slowly with his hands visible. As he drew nearer, Charlotte recognized one of the men from town, not the leader but a younger man with a distinctive red bandana. The messenger spoke briefly with Blackwell, then returned to his companions. Another tense consultation followed among the strangers before the entire group turned and rode away, disappearing over the same rise they had approached from. Charlotte released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The ranch hands remained at their posts, clearly suspicious of the easy withdrawal. Only when the dust had settled completely did Blackwell give a signal for them to stand down. As the men began to disperse, Charlotte hurried outside, propriety forgotten in her need to understand what had transpired. "Mr. Blackwell," she called, approaching the group of men still conferring in the yard. "What happened?"
Who were they?
Blackwell turned, his expression troubled despite the apparent resolution. Bounty hunters, as Quinn suspected, led by a man named Marshall Davis.
What did they want? Levi answered, his voice tight. Me.
Or rather, the bounty on me. Charlotte's stomach dropped, but you said they left. For now, Blackwell confirmed grimly. Davis claims he's not interested in bloodshed, just the legal bounty. Offered us a choice. Hand over Quinn peacefully, or they'll return with the territorial marshal and a properly executed warrant.
They can't do that, Charlotte protested. It's been years since.
There's no statute of limitations on the charges against me, Levi interrupted quietly. Murder, robbery, conspiracy, the bounty's still valid. But it's unjust you left that life behind. You've built something honorable here. Charlotte looked between the men, seeking agreement. Surely the law must recognize reformation. Blackwell's expression was sympathetic but realistic. The territorial courts are overwhelmed, Miss Hayes. They care about paper justice, not moral complexity. If Davis returns with a legal warrant, we have limited options. Then we must prevent that, Charlotte insisted. Speak to the sheriff in Clearwater. He knows Levi's character now, not what he was. Sheriff Matthews is a good man, Levi acknowledged, but his jurisdiction ends at the town limits. A territorial marshal operates under federal authority. The hopelessness in his tone ignited something fierce in Charlotte's chest. So you're simply going to surrender, after everything you've built here? Levi's eyes met hers, startled by her vehemence. I won't risk the ranch in a fight we can't win. There are other ways to fight besides guns, mister. Quinn, Charlotte replied, her mind racing through possibilities. Legal challenges, character witnesses, petitions for clemency. She's not entirely wrong, Blackwell said thoughtfully. Judge Wilson in Denver has progressive views on rehabilitation. If we could get your case before him, rather than the regular circuit court. That would take time we don't have, Levi argued. Davis gave us 2 days. It takes nearly that long just to reach Denver. Then we send a telegram, Charlotte suggested, to Mr. Blackwell's lawyer in Denver, to his sister who's hosting the girls. To anyone who might help. Blackwell considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. It's worth attempting. Matthews might let us use the telegraph in Clearwater. And what of Crawford? Levi pressed. Davis and his men might be the immediate threat, but Crawford's still out there. The ranch remains vulnerable. One crisis at a time, Blackwell decided. Johnson, ride to town immediately. Tell Matthews what's happening and send this telegram. He quickly scribbled a message. And bring back whatever news you can about Crawford's whereabouts. As Johnson mounted up, Charlotte turned to Levi. Is there anything in your favor legally? Services to the community, perhaps. Testimony about leaving Crawford's gang before the worst crimes. Levi's expression softened slightly at her determined advocacy. It's not that simple, Charlotte. The law doesn't see shades of gray in these matters. Then we must make them see, she insisted. Gather evidence of your character now, letters from those you've helped, statements from reputable citizens. Blackwell was nodding slowly. Judge Wilson does consider character evidence more heavily than most. It might help. A spark of hope kindled in Levi's eyes, quickly suppressed. Even if it worked, and that's a mighty big if, Davis won't wait patiently while we build a legal case. He wants the bounty, and he has the law on his side as it stands. Then we need leverage, Blackwell said grimly, something to make him reconsider. The conversation continued in this vein as they moved toward the main house. Strategies proposed and discarded, options weighed and found wanting. Charlotte listened intently, contributing when she could, but increasingly aware of the complexity of Levi's situation. The law, designed to protect innocent citizens, had become a weapon that might destroy a good man because it couldn't account for genuine redemption. As evening approached, a sense of resigned determination settled over the ranch. Guards remained posted despite the bounty hunter's departure, preparations for potential conflict continuing alongside efforts to resolve the legal threat. Charlotte found herself assigned practical tasks: inventory of medical supplies, preparation of food that could be easily distributed if needed, organization of the main house for potential defense. She worked methodically, grateful for the distraction of physical labor. Yet her mind continued to circle the central problem: how to protect a man from his own past when the law recognized only documented facts, not the transformation of character she had witnessed firsthand. After supper, a subdued affair with most hands eating at their posts, Charlotte retreated to Emma's room, which had been assigned to her during the crisis. The girl's possessions surrounded her, books carefully arranged on shelves, a collection of pressed wildflowers, drawings pinned to the wall. Evidence of a childhood Charlotte was determined to preserve by helping secure the ranch's future. A soft knock at the door roused her from these thoughts. She opened it to find Levi standing in the hallway, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly. Charlotte nodded, stepping back to allow him entry while leaving the door ajar for propriety's sake. Levi remained near the threshold, hat in hands, seemingly reluctant to intrude further into the feminine space. "I wanted to thank you," he said after a moment, "for your support today. Not many would defend a former outlaw so vigorously." "I defended a man I know to be honorable now, regardless of his past," Charlotte replied simply. Levi's gaze dropped to his hat, which he turned slowly in his hands. "You have more faith in me than I do." The admission, so honest in its vulnerability, touched Charlotte deeply. Perhaps that's why we need others in our lives, to remind us of our better selves when we forget. He looked up, something raw and unguarded in his blue eyes. "Charlotte, if Davis returns with that warrant." "We'll face it," she said firmly. "All of us together. You don't understand." "I've seen what happens in these situations. It rarely ends peacefully." His voice roughened. "I don't want you witnessing that, or worse, caught in the middle of it." Charlotte moved closer, propriety forgotten in her need to reassure him. "I've spent my life avoiding difficult situations, Levi, running from confrontation. It brought me no peace, no security." She held his gaze steadily. "I won't run anymore, not from this." "Not from you." The air between them seemed to change, charged with unspoken meaning. Levi's expression shifted, vulnerable certainty replacing doubt. "If circumstances were different," he began. "They aren't different," Charlotte interrupted gently. "They're exactly what they are, and we must face them as we are, flawed perhaps, but trying to do what's right." Levi's hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped. "You deserve better than a man with my history, Charlotte." "I believe I deserve a man who judges himself by his highest aspirations rather than his lowest moments," she countered. "A man with the courage to change, to build rather than destroy." For a suspended moment, everything between them was perfectly clear. The growing attachment neither had acknowledged directly, the possibilities that existed despite the circumstances conspiring against them. Then Levi stepped back, breaking the connection. "I should check the perimeter before turning in," he said, his tone returning to practicality though his eyes remained soft. "Thank you again, Charlotte." "For everything." As he left, Charlotte remained in the doorway, watching his tall figure move down the hallway. Whatever happened in the coming days, she realized, her heart was no longer entirely her own. Somewhere between that first meeting on the train platform and this moment, Levi Quinn had claimed a part of it, not by intention or design, but through the simple truth of who he had chosen to become. She closed the door softly, turning back to Emma's room with renewed determination. They would find a way through this crisis, protecting both Levi and the ranch. The alternative was simply unacceptable. Outside, night settled over Blackwell Ranch, stars appearing in the vast Colorado sky while guards maintained their vigilant watch. The danger remained Davis and his bounty hunters to the south, Crawford's gang potentially to the north, but for tonight at least there was the peace of temporary reprieve and the strength found in shared purpose. Charlotte sat at Emma's small desk and began to write letters to potential character witnesses, arguments for legal clemency, and finally, a personal testimony to the man Levi Quinn had become. If words were her best weapon in this fight, then she would wield them with all the skill and passion she possessed. The night deepened around her, but Charlotte Hayes continued writing by lamplight, refusing surrender to either circumstance or despair. Dawn broke with a crimson intensity that seemed to reflect the tension gripping the ranch. Charlotte had slept fitfully, rising before first light to help prepare breakfast for the men who had maintained watch through the night. She worked alongside Mrs. Peterson, the neighboring rancher's wife who had arrived to assist after learning of the crisis, both women moving with efficient purpose in the kitchen while conversation remained minimal. The ranch itself existed in a state of wary preparedness, normal activities continuing but with defensive measures maintained. Men tended livestock with rifles slung over their shoulders. Routine tasks were performed with one eye always on the horizon. Blackwell himself seemed to be everywhere at once, checking defenses, conferring with hands, planning for multiple contingencies. It was near mid-morning when Johnson returned from Clearwater, his expression grim as he dismounted in the yard. Charlotte watched through the kitchen window as he spoke urgently with Blackwell and Levi, their faces growing more troubled with each passing moment. "Something's happened," she murmured, setting aside the bread she'd been kneading. "Mrs. Peterson wiped her hands on her apron. "Better brace yourself, dear. Bad news has a way of coming in floods out here, not trickles." Charlotte moved to the door just as Blackwell entered, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged, "you should hear this too." Johnson followed, removing his hat respectfully. Levi came last, his expression unreadable but tension evident in every line of his body. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, looking between them. "Did the telegram reach Denver?" "It did," Johnson confirmed, "but that's not the urgent matter." He glanced at Blackwell, who nodded for him to continue. "Sheriff Matthews received word this morning. Crawford's gang hit the Petersons' place at dawn." Mrs. Peterson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "My Joseph, the boys." "They're alive," Johnson assured her quickly, "but hurt. Crawford's men took most of their stock and burned the barn." "And my home?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "Standing, ma'am, though they ransacked it pretty thoroughly." Relief and anguish warred in Mrs. Peterson's expression. "I need to go to them." "Johnson will escort you," Blackwell said firmly, "but there's more we need to discuss first." The ranch hand nodded grimly. "While I was in town, 3 of Davis's men were there too. Talking openly about coming back today with papers from the territorial judge in Silverton, legal authority to take Quinn in." Charlotte felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her, so soon. How could they possibly have obtained a proper warrant already? "Money talks," Levi said flatly, "and Silverton's Judge Holloway is known for being accommodating to certain interests." "There's worse news," Johnson continued reluctantly. Crawford himself was seen in Clearwater late last night, talking with one of Davis's men behind the saloon. The implications landed heavily in the sudden silence. Blackwell voiced what they were all thinking. "They're working together." Levi's expression darkened. "Crawford provides information about me and the ranch layout. Davis gets his bounty legally rather than risking a fight. Then Crawford hits us while we're distracted by the arrest. That's why they attacked the Peterson place first," Blackwell realized, "removing potential allies, spreading our attention thin. My Joseph tried to warn you last week about strangers asking questions, Mrs. Peterson said, wiping tears from her weathered cheeks. Said he'd ride over himself if they came back." "They made sure he couldn't," Levi concluded grimly. Charlotte processed this cascade of information, seeing how events had been manipulated from the beginning. The timing of Davis appearing in town just as news of Crawford reached us, it wasn't coincidence. "No," Blackwell agreed. "It was strategy. Divide our defenses, create legal complications, then strike when we're vulnerable." "What can we do?" Charlotte asked, looking between the men. Blackwell moved to the window, surveying his ranch with the eyes of a man who had fought for every acre. "We have perhaps 6 hours before Davis returns with his warrant. We need to decide now, fight or negotiate." "Fighting the law brings consequences beyond the immediate,"
Levi pointed out. Even if we succeed, you'd be outlaws yourselves. Everything you've built would be forfeit. And negotiation, Charlotte pressed. Is there room for compromise? Levi's expression hardened. Davis wants the bounty, $500. Crawford wants the ranch weakened for his own attack. Neither man compromises when he sees advantage. A tense silence fell as they considered their limited options. Charlotte's mind raced through possibilities, recalling fragments of conversation, seeking connections others might have missed. What if, she said slowly, we could separate Davis from Crawford, turn one against the other? All eyes turned to her. Blackwell's eyebrows rose. How would you propose doing that, Miss Hayes? Davis is a bounty hunter, yes. His primary motivation is financial, not personal. Charlotte looked to Levi for confirmation, who nodded cautiously. What if we offered him a more valuable bounty than yours? Understanding dawned in Levi's eyes. Crawford. Exactly, Crawford's bounty must be substantial after years of outlawry. Johnson nodded slowly. Last I heard it was over $2,000, 4 times Quinn's price. And if Davis learned he was being used by Crawford, manipulated into creating a distraction while Crawford planned his own attack. Charlotte let the implication hang. Professional pride, Blackwell mused. Bounty hunters don't like being played for fools. It might work, Levi admitted, but we'd need proof of their connection, something concrete to show Davis. And we'd need to approach him without Crawford's knowledge. I have an idea about that too, Charlotte said, surprising herself with her own boldness, but it would require taking a significant risk. The men exchanged glances, weighing this unexpected strategy against their dwindling alternatives. Finally, Blackwell nodded. Let's hear it, Miss Hayes. At this point, calculated risk seems our best option. As Charlotte outlined her plan, she watched the skepticism in their expressions gradually transform into reluctant consideration. It was dangerous, certainly. Success was far from guaranteed, but it offered something precious in their current circumstances, a chance to resolve the crisis without bloodshed on either side. It could work, Levi said finally. But the personal risk is too high. I can't allow. It's not your decision to allow or forbid, Mr. Quinn, Charlotte interrupted, her voice firm. It's mine to offer. Blackwell studied her with new respect. You understand what you're proposing. The danger involved. I do, Charlotte met his gaze steadily. I also understand the alternatives. Sometimes the greatest courage lies in seeking peace rather than preparing for war. A long moment passed as Blackwell considered. Then he nodded once decisively. Very well, Johnson, escort Mrs. Peterson home, then continue to town with Miss Hayes. Quinn and I will make preparations here. Sir, Levi protested, I should be the one too. You're the one with a bounty on your head, Blackwell cut in. You need to remain out of sight until we know if this works. His expression softened slightly. I understand your concerns, Quinn, but Miss Hayes is right. This may be our best chance. The look Levi gave Charlotte contained a complex mixture of emotions. Admiration, frustration, concern, and something deeper she dared not name in this moment of crisis. She met his gaze steadily, willing him to understand that this was her choice, made with clear knowledge of the risks involved. I'll be careful, she promised quietly. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once, reluctant acceptance rather than approval. We'll be ready when you return, whatever the outcome. As preparations began for implementing Charlotte's plan, she found herself in the unusual position of being the catalyst for action rather than a bystander. It was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously, using her intelligence and perception to protect those who had become important to her, taking active steps rather than passively accepting circumstances. An hour later, dressed in her most respectable traveling outfit with her hair neatly arranged beneath her best hat, Charlotte stood beside the wagon that would take her first to the Peterson Ranch, then on to Clearwater. Johnson had already loaded the few supplies they would need, his expression reflecting his own misgivings about the plan. Blackwell approached as she prepared to board, his manner gruff but his eyes revealing genuine concern. Remember, Miss Hayes, information only, no heroics. If the situation seems dangerous, withdraw immediately. I understand, Mr. Blackwell. Charlotte adjusted her gloves, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. I'll return with either good news or valuable intelligence. See that you return regardless, he replied quietly. You've become important to this ranch, to all of us. The simple acknowledgement touched her deeply. Charlotte nodded, unable to trust her voice for a moment. As Blackwell moved away, Levi approached, his expression still troubled. He held something in his hand, a small revolver, well-maintained but clearly aged. "It was my mother's," he said quietly, offering it to her. "Small enough to conceal in your reticule. I've checked it, it's loaded and reliable." Charlotte hesitated, then accepted the weapon, surprised by its weight despite its size. "I've never fired a gun," she admitted. "Point and squeeze the trigger," Levi said simply. "At close range, you don't need to be precise." His eyes held hers intently. "I pray you won't need it, but I'll rest easier knowing you have it." The gesture, so practical yet so deeply personal, moved Charlotte unexpectedly. This was no borrowed tool but a family heirloom, perhaps Levi's most tangible connection to his past. "I'll guard it carefully," she promised, placing it in her reticule. "Guard yourself more carefully," he replied, his voice rough with emotion he clearly struggled to contain. Impulsively, Charlotte reached out, briefly touching his arm. "This will work, Levi." "I believe that." He covered her hand with his own for just a moment, the contact brief but electric. "Come back safe, that's all I ask." As Johnson helped her into the wagon, Charlotte felt the weight of their hopes and fears accompanying her. The journey ahead was uncertain, the dangers real. Yet for the first time in her life, she was moving toward conflict rather than away from it, not from recklessness or naivety, but from the clear understanding that some things were worth fighting for, even at great personal risk. The ranch receded behind them as they drove toward the Peterson property. Charlotte didn't look back. Instead, she focused on the path ahead, mentally rehearsing what she would say when she reached Clearwater, preparing herself for the delicate and dangerous task of turning one enemy against another to save the place and people who had become her home. The Peterson Ranch presented a grim tableau of frontier violence. The blackened skeleton of the barn dominated the scene, still smoldering in places despite the efforts to extinguish the flames. Cattle pens stood empty, the gate torn from its hinges. The main house remained standing but showed clear signs of violation, windows broken, doors splintered, personal possessions scattered across the yard in senseless destruction. Charlotte helped Mrs. Peterson down from the wagon, supporting the older woman as she confronted the devastation of her home. Inside, they found Joseph Peterson and his two teenage sons being tended by a neighboring woman. The rancher's head was bandaged, his face bruised, but his eyes lit with relief at the sight of his wife. "Margaret," he said hoarsely, attempting to rise from his chair. "Don't you move, Joseph Peterson," his wife scolded, though tears streamed down her face as she hurried to his side. "I'm here now." Charlotte stepped back, giving the family privacy for their reunion. Johnson had already moved outside to assess the damage more thoroughly and speak with the neighbors who had responded to the attack. After ensuring the Petersons had the immediate assistance they needed, Charlotte reluctantly indicated to Johnson that they should continue to Clearwater. Time was critical if her plan had any chance of success. "You're certain about this, Miss Hayes?" Johnson asked as they drove away from the Peterson ranch. "What you saw back there, that's the work of the men you're planning to approach." "I'm certain that doing nothing guarantees similar or worse at Blackwell Ranch," she replied steadily, though the images of destruction remained vivid in her mind. "At least this way we have a chance." Johnson nodded, respect evident in his expression. "Mr. Blackwell was right about you, got steel in your spine." The unexpected compliment brought a slight smile to Charlotte's lips despite the gravity of their mission. "Not steel, Mr. Johnson, just conviction." They reached Clearwater by early afternoon, the town unusually busy for a weekday. Charlotte noted the additional horses hitched outside the saloon and the small clusters of men conversing tensely on the boardwalk. News of the Peterson attack had clearly spread, creating an atmosphere of anxious anticipation. Johnson drove directly to the sheriff's office as planned. Sheriff Matthews met them at the door, his weathered face grave as he ushered them inside. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, Matthews had the watchful eyes of someone who had seen too much frontier justice and too little law. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged, helping her to a chair. "Johnson filled me in on your plan when he was here earlier, bold thinking but dangerous." "Is Davis still in town?" Charlotte asked, removing her gloves and setting her reticule carefully on her lap. "At the hotel," Matthews confirmed. "With two of his men. The others are camped outside town, presumably preparing to ride to Blackwell's once the paperwork arrives." "And Crawford. Gone by sunrise." But one of his men was seen watching the hotel from across the street most of the morning. The sheriff's expression hardened.
There's definitely communication between them, though they're being careful about it.
Charlotte considered this information.
Have you been able to verify the claim about Judge Holloway in Silverton issuing a warrant? Telegraph came through an hour ago. It's real enough, properly executed warrant for Levi Quinn on charges dating back to his time with Crawford's gang. Matthews shook his head grimly. Holloway's known for being quick with his signature when properly motivated. Bribed, Johnson translated flatly. Most likely, Matthews agreed, but the warrant's legal regardless. When Davis receives it, probably on the afternoon stage, he'll have full authority to arrest Quinn. Charlotte's mind worked rapidly, adjusting her plan to this new information. Then we need to act quickly. Is there somewhere I could meet with Davis privately, without Crawford's men observing? The sheriff considered this. My house is just behind the office. Sarah's visiting her sister in Denver, so it's empty. I could bring Davis there through the back entrance. Would he agree to such a meeting? Matthews nodded. If I tell him it concerns the Quinn arrest and potential complications. He's cautious but pragmatic. Then please arrange it as soon as possible, Charlotte requested. And if you could provide some paper and ink, I need to prepare certain documentation. While Johnson went to station himself where he could observe any movement from Crawford's remaining men, Charlotte worked at the sheriff's desk, drafting the documents that would form the foundation of her strategy. Her hands remained steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Everything depended on her ability to convince a hardened bounty hunter that his current course of action was against his own interests. An hour later, Matthews returned with news that Davis had agreed to the meeting. Charlotte gathered her papers and the small revolver Levi had given her, following the sheriff through the back door of his office and along a narrow alley to a modest house set slightly apart from the main street. Inside, the home reflected its bachelor occupant, functional furniture, minimal decoration, but scrupulously clean. Matthews led her to a small sitting room, then departed to fetch Davis, leaving Charlotte alone with her thoughts and plans. She used the time to compose herself, arranging the documents on a small table and rehearsing her approach one final time. The stakes could not be higher. Not just Levi's freedom, but the safety of everyone at Blackwell Ranch rested on the outcome of this meeting. The sound of the back door opening alerted her to their arrival. Charlotte rose, smoothing her skirts and lifting her chin as Marshal Davis entered the room. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had appeared at a distance, tall, broad-shouldered, with iron-gray hair and the hard eyes of a man who tracked human prey for a living. Yet there was also an undeniable intelligence in his gaze as he assessed her. Miss Hayes, he acknowledged, removing his hat but not offering his hand. Sheriff says you have information regarding Levi Quinn.
Please sit, mister.
Davis, Charlotte replied, gesturing to the chair across from her own. What I have to discuss affects not only Quinn but your own interests as well. Davis raised an eyebrow but took the offered seat, his movements controlled and deliberate. Sheriff Matthews positioned himself by the door, present but not interfering. I'll be direct, Charlotte began, meeting Davis's evaluating gaze. I know you're working with James Crawford to coordinate your arrest of Levi Quinn with Crawford's planned attack on the Blackwell Ranch. Davis's expression remained impassive, neither confirming nor denying. Charlotte continued without waiting for a response. I also know Crawford provided you with information about Quinn's whereabouts and history, facilitating your application for a warrant from Judge Holloway.
Interesting theories, Miss Hayes, Davis replied, his voice a deep rumble.
But what purpose does this conversation serve? I have legal authority to arrest a wanted man. That's the beginning and end of it. Charlotte leaned forward slightly. What if I told you Crawford is using you, Mr. Davis? That his interest in Quinn is secondary to his plans for the ranch itself, plans that would deny you a much larger bounty.
A flicker of interest crossed Davis's face. I'm listening.
Charlotte slid one of her prepared documents across the table, a copy of an old wanted poster for Crawford himself, the bounty amount clearly visible. $2,000 for Crawford himself, plus additional amounts for each member of his gang with outstanding warrants. She paused, allowing this to register, considerably more than Quinn's $500.
Davis glanced at the poster.
Crawford's also considerably harder to capture. He has a gang. Quinn is one man. A man who knows Crawford's methods, hideouts, and weaknesses better than anyone, Charlotte countered. A potential ally in a much more lucrative pursuit, if handled correctly.
She could see the calculation beginning in Davis's eyes, the professional assessment of risk versus reward. She pressed her advantage. Crawford attacked the Peterson ranch yesterday, destroyed property, stole livestock, injured the family. Charlotte's voice hardened. It was a preliminary strike to weaken potential reinforcements for Blackwell. His true target. And your proof of this connection? Davis asked, his tone neutral but his attention fully engaged now. Charlotte presented her second document, a carefully prepared timeline correlating Crawford's movements with Davis's own arrival in the region, including the meeting behind the saloon Johnson had reported. Too many coincidences, Mr. Davis. Crawford doesn't want Quinn arrested because of old grudges. He wants the ranch's defenses weakened by the conflict and confusion your arrest would create. She leaned forward slightly. He's using you as a distraction while he prepares to steal thousands of dollars worth of Blackwell cattle and horses. Property that would be under your protection once you're executing an official warrant on Blackwell land. This legal implication clearly struck home. Davis's expression shifted subtly, professional pride engaged now alongside financial interest. An interesting perspective, Miss Hayes, but ultimately speculative. Is it? Charlotte slid forward her final document, a proposed agreement between Davis and Blackwell Ranch. This offers you something concrete instead. Mr. Blackwell proposes a partnership. Quinn provides his knowledge of Crawford's operations. You provide your legal authority as a bounty hunter. Together you track and capture Crawford and his gang after they make their move on the ranch. Davis picked up the document, scanning it with practiced eyes. Blackwell would allow his ranch to be used as bait. With preparations in place, yes. Charlotte maintained steady eye contact. Crawford believes your arrest of Quinn will create chaos. Instead, it would be a coordinated effort to trap him when he attacks. And Quinn, he still wanted regardless of this arrangement. Charlotte had prepared for this question. The agreement includes Blackwell's commitment to petition Judge Wilson in Denver for a review of Quinn's case, emphasizing his 3 years of lawful employment and documented separation from Crawford's gang before their worst crimes were committed. Davis set the paper down, studying Charlotte with new interest. You've thought this through carefully, Miss Hayes, but I'm curious, what's your role in all this? School teachers don't typically involve themselves in matters of frontier justice. The question was designed to unbalance her, Charlotte recognized. To remind her that she was operating outside her proper sphere, she refused to be intimidated. My role, Mr. Davis, is to protect what matters to me, the ranch, the children I teach. The community I've joined. She met his gaze directly. And yes, Levi Quinn himself, a man whose present character I have observed firsthand, regardless of his past mistakes. Something shifted in Davis's expression, not softening exactly, but a subtle reassessment. Your conviction is noted, Miss Hayes, but ultimately this is a business decision. Of course, Charlotte agreed, which is why the business case is so compelling. $2,000 for Crawford versus $500 for Quinn. Plus the additional bounties on gang members. Plus the gratitude of a prominent rancher with connections to the territorial governor. She allowed this to settle before delivering her final argument. Or you can proceed with arresting Quinn alone, discovering too late that Crawford has used you as a pawn in his larger scheme, leaving you responsible for failing to prevent a major theft while executing your warrant on Blackwell property. The silence that followed was weighted with consideration. Davis turned to Sheriff Matthews, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Your assessment of this proposal, Sheriff. Matthews straightened from his position against the wall. Blackwell's a respected man in this territory. If he's willing to stake his ranch on this plan, I'm inclined to take it seriously. He paused. And I've known Quinn these past 3 years. Whatever he was before, he's worked honest and hard since arriving here. Davis returned his attention to Charlotte, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. I'll need to discuss this with my men. Of course, Charlotte agreed smoothly, but time is limited. Crawford won't wait indefinitely, especially if he suspects his plan has been discovered. 1 hour, Davis decided, rising from his chair. I'll give you my answer then. After he had departed, Sheriff Matthews turned to Charlotte with newfound respect. That was impressively handled, Miss Hayes. You presented your case like a trained lawyer. My father was an attorney, Charlotte replied, the tension she had been suppressing finally emerging as a slight tremor in her hands. I used to help prepare his arguments when I was younger. Well, you did him proud today. Matthews moved toward the door. I'll check with Johnson, see if there's any sign of Crawford's men becoming suspicious. You should rest while you can. Left alone, Charlotte finally allowed herself to acknowledge the enormity of what she had just attempted. She had confronted a professional bounty hunter, challenged his judgment, and proposed an alternative that might save Levi and the ranch, or might collapse entirely if Davis decided his original plan carried less risk. She retrieved Levi's mother's revolver from her reticule, studying the small weapon with mixed emotions. The fact that he had entrusted her with something so personally significant spoke volumes about the connection that had grown between them. Whatever happened next, that connection had become precious to her in ways she hadn't anticipated when she'd first arrived at Blackwell Ranch. Charlotte carefully returned the revolver to her reticule and moved to the window, gazing out at the small garden behind the sheriff's house. Wild roses similar to those at her cabin climbed a rough trellis, delicate beauty persisting in harsh conditions. Like hope in desperate circumstances, like love in uncertain times. The thought startled her with its clarity. Love, was that what she felt for Levi Quinn, this fierce protectiveness, this determination to defend not just his freedom but his chance at redemption? Before she could fully examine this revelation, a commotion from the direction of the main street drew her attention. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Charlotte moved quickly to the front of the house, peering carefully through the curtained window. Men were gathering outside the sheriff's office, expressions tense. Among them, she recognized one of Crawford's gang members, the same man who had delivered the message to Blackwell Ranch days earlier. Her heart sank. Had their plan already been discovered, the back door opened and Sheriff Matthews entered quickly, his expression grim. Davis's men captured one of Crawford's scouts watching the hotel. Beat the truth out of him before Davis could stop them. What truth? Charlotte asked, though she feared she already knew. Crawford's planning to hit Blackwell Ranch tonight, not tomorrow as we thought. Using the scout's information, Davis has decided to move immediately. Matthews shook his head. He's gathering his men now. Charlotte's mind raced through implications. Does he accept our proposal? Partially. He'll work with Blackwell to capture Crawford, but he's still insisting on taking Quinn in afterward. The sheriff looked genuinely regretful, says the warrant's too official to ignore completely. It wasn't the outcome Charlotte had hoped for, but it offered at least temporary cooperation against the more immediate threat. We need to warn the ranch, she said urgently, if Crawford's moving tonight. Johnson's already preparing the wagon, Matthews assured her, and I'm sending 2 deputies with you. Not official involvement, but men I trust who have had enough of Crawford's terror in this region. Relief and new urgency propelled Charlotte into motion. She gathered her documents and belongings, mind already turning to the next challenge, reaching the ranch before Crawford, coordinating defense with Davis's approaching force, protecting both the property and the people who had become her family. Miss Hayes, the sheriff said as she prepared to depart, what you did today, approaching Davis, proposing this strategy, it was exceptional courage. Charlotte paused, considering this assessment. Not courage, Sheriff, necessity. We protect what matters to us by whatever means we can. Outside, Johnson waited with the wagon, 2 determined-looking deputies on horseback beside him. The afternoon was advancing, shadows lengthening as the sun moved toward the western mountains. They would be racing darkness to reach the ranch before Crawford's gang. As Charlotte climbed aboard, she caught sight of Davis and his men mounting up near the hotel, 8 riders heavily armed and moving with military precision. Whatever his ultimate intentions toward Levi, Davis was clearly a formidable ally against the more immediate threat of Crawford's attack. Ready, Miss Hayes? Johnson asked, gathering the reins. Charlotte settled herself firmly on the seat, Levi's revolver a reassuring weight in her reticule. Yes, Mr. Johnson, let's go home. The wagon lurched forward, beginning the urgent journey back to Blackwell Ranch and whatever fate awaited them there. Behind them, Davis's group followed at a distance, neither allies nor enemies yet, but potential salvation against the coming storm. Charlotte fixed her gaze on the road ahead, silently willing the horses to greater speed. Time had become their most precious and limited resource, and somewhere in the Colorado wilderness, James Crawford was preparing to strike at the heart of everything she had come to love. The journey back to Blackwell Ranch unfolded in a tableau of tension and urgency, the wagon pushing forward at dangerous speed along trails designed for more cautious travel.
Johnson handled the reins with grim expertise, coaxing maximum effort from the team while Charlotte braced herself against the jarring motion, her thoughts focused on what awaited them. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows that seemed to presage the darkness Crawford would bring. Behind them, Davis and his men maintained a steady pace, neither overtaking nor falling behind, maintaining their separate identity while sharing the common destination. There, Johnson called suddenly, pointing ahead where a thin plume of smoke rose above the tree line. "Signal fire on the north ridge. Crawford's been spotted." Charlotte's heart clenched with fear and determination. The ranch had warning at least. Blackwell's men would be prepared rather than surprised, but prepared enough against Crawford's experienced gang. As they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, the scene below revealed a property transformed for defense. Cattle had been moved to the most protected pastures. Barricades had been erected at strategic points. Armed men positioned themselves with clear fields of fire. The main house windows had been reinforced with wooden shutters, transforming the welcoming home into a defensible fortress. Johnson drove directly to the main house, deputies flanking them protectively. As they pulled up, Blackwell emerged, rifle in hand, Levi close behind him. The relief in Levi's eyes when he saw Charlotte sent a wave of emotion through her that momentarily overwhelmed the urgency of their situation. "Crawford's coming tonight," she called as Johnson helped her down. "His scout was captured in town." "We know," Blackwell replied grimly. "Our lookout spotted them gathering north of the property about an hour ago. 8 riders, maybe more." Charlotte glanced behind them to where Davis and his men were now visible on the ridge. "Davis has agreed to help against Crawford, but he still intends to execute the warrant afterward." Levi nodded, unsurprised, expected as much. "One crisis at a time." "They're coming from the north," Blackwell informed Davis as the bounty hunters approached, likely trying to drive off the herd in the confusion of their attack. Davis dismounted, his manner shifting to professional assessment as he surveyed the ranch's defenses. "You've prepared well. My men will reinforce your western perimeter. Crawford favors that approach when he has sufficient numbers." The two leaders moved away to coordinate strategy, leaving Charlotte and Levi in a brief moment of privacy despite the activity surrounding them. "You shouldn't have gone to town," Levi said quietly, his eyes revealing the concern his words didn't fully express. "It was too dangerous." "It was necessary," Charlotte replied simply, "and it worked at least partially. We have allies now instead of additional enemies." Levi's expression softened. "You're remarkable, Charlotte Hayes," facing down Marshal Davis with nothing but words and courage. "Not just words," she admitted, patting her reticule. "I had your mother's revolver for reassurance." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Did you need it?" "No, but knowing it was there, knowing you had entrusted me with something so personal, it helped." Their eyes held, communicating what circumstances prevented them from expressing more directly. Then reality intruded as Blackwell approached, his expression grim. "Miss Hayes, I need you in the main house. If there's shooting, stay in the root cellar with Mrs. Peterson and her boys." He turned to Levi. "Quinn, Davis wants you on the south ridge. Says you'll know where Crawford might position snipers." They parted without further words, the demands of the moment superseding personal failings. Charlotte followed Blackwell into the house, where Mrs. Peterson was organizing medical supplies with tight-lipped efficiency. The woman's face still showed the strain of her own property's devastation, yet here she was, preparing to tend wounds not yet inflicted. "The root cellar is prepared," she informed Charlotte, "though I'll be up here as long as there are men needing attention." "As will I," Charlotte replied firmly. "I have some experience with bandaging and basic care."
Mrs.
Peterson nodded approvingly. "Good, we may need all hands before this night is through." The next hours passed in tense preparation. Charlotte helped reinforce windows, prepare bandages, and position water buckets throughout the house in case of fire. Through it all, her awareness of Levi's whereabouts remained constant, tracking his movements as he consulted with Davis, positioned men, checked defenses. Despite his outlaw past, his natural leadership was evident, respected by both Blackwell's hands and Davis's more hardened men. As darkness fell completely, an unnatural hush settled over the ranch. Lanterns were extinguished, conversation ceased, and every defender found their position in the blackness that would conceal both them and their approaching enemies. Charlotte stood at an upstairs window, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters. The moonlight illuminated the yard in silver relief, casting deep shadows that seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. Or was that actual movement, Crawford's men approaching under cover of darkness? A hand touched her shoulder gently, and she turned to find Levi behind her, his features barely visible in the darkness. "You should be in the cellar," he said softly. "Not yet," she replied, "not while I can still help." He moved closer, his voice dropping further. "Charlotte, if this goes badly." "It won't," she interrupted, unwilling to entertain the possibility. "If it does," he continued steadily, "I want you to know that meeting you at that train station was the best thing that ever happened to me, whatever comes after." The simple declaration, delivered in darkness with danger approaching, affected Charlotte more powerfully than any elaborate profession could have. This was Levi's truth, offered when pretense held no purpose. "For me as well," she whispered, reaching for his hand in the darkness, "though I think we have many more train stations in our future, Levi Quinn." His fingers tightened around hers. "I hope you're right." A low whistle from outside, the signal they had been dreading. Crawford's men had been spotted approaching the northern pasture. "I have to go," Levi said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Be careful," Charlotte replied, the inadequacy of the words painful in her throat. He touched her cheek briefly, then was gone, moving silently down the stairs to his assigned position. Charlotte remained at the window, heart pounding as she strained to see movement in the silver-washed landscape below. The attack began not with gunfire but with fire itself, a burning arrow arcing high into the night sky before plunging into the hay storage beyond the barn. Flames erupted almost instantly, illuminating the ranch yard in flickering orange light that transformed the familiar scene into something hellish and strange. Shouts erupted as Blackwell's men moved to combat the fire. The moment they emerged from cover, gunfire exploded from multiple positions, Crawford's strategy revealed as the distraction succeeded in drawing defenders into the open. Charlotte watched in horror as one ranch hand fell, then another. From her elevated position, she could see what those on the ground could not: additional riders circling from the east, preparing to drive off the cattle, while the main force engaged the defenders. Without conscious decision, Charlotte found herself moving, not to the cellar as instructed, but down the stairs and toward the back door. Someone needed to warn the men about the flanking movement. With everyone engaged at the front, she alone had seen the true danger. Outside, the night air carried the acrid scent of gunpowder and burning hay. Charlotte pressed herself against the side of the house, moving carefully toward where she had last seen Blackwell directing the defense. Gunfire continued to crack through the night, punctuated by shouts and the frightened lowing of cattle. She had nearly reached the corner of the house when a figure loomed before her, a tall man with a bandana covering the lower half of his face, rifle in hand. One of Crawford's men, having circled behind their defenses. Charlotte froze, her hand instinctively moving to her reticule where Levi's revolver waited. The outlaw's eyes widened in surprise at finding a woman, then narrowed with cruel calculation. "Well now," he drawled, lowering his rifle slightly, "what have we here?" Charlotte took a step backward, fingers closing around the revolver's grip. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. The man laughed, the sound chilling in its casualness. "Or what, little lady, you'll scream?" He moved closer. "Everyone's too busy to hear you." In one fluid motion, Charlotte drew the revolver and aimed it at the center of his chest, just as Levi had instructed. The outlaw's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "I said stay back," she repeated, her grip tightening on the cold steel. The outlaw sneered, dismissing her threat as a bluff. "Put it down, darlin', before you hurt yourself." He lunged, closing the distance between them in a sudden rush of motion. Charlotte didn't think, she didn't hesitate, she simply squeezed the trigger as Levi had instructed. The revolver bucked in her hand, the report deafening in the confined space between the house and the shed. The man grunted, spinning backward as the bullet took him in the shoulder, his rifle clattering to the ground. He stared at her in shock, clutching his wound, the arrogance wiped clean from his face. Before he could recover, a dark shape emerged from the shadows behind him. A rifle butt slammed into the back of his head, and the outlaw crumpled to the dirt without a sound. Levi stood over him, chest heaving, his eyes wild as they snapped to Charlotte. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, her hands shaking now that the moment had passed. He was circling back. "There are more of them coming from the east, flanking us." Levi processed this instantly, his expression shifting from concern to tactical resolve. "The East Gully, if they get established there, they'll have crossfire on the house." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back door.
Get inside now, you did good, Charlotte, you saved us. He didn't wait for an answer, turning to sprint toward the defensive line, shouting orders to Davis's men who were positioned near the corral. Flankers, East Ridge. Cut them off. Charlotte scrambled inside, locking the door behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but fear had been replaced by a cold clarity. She moved to the front windows, peering out to see the tide of the battle turning. Levi's warning had come just in time. Davis's bounty hunters, alerted to the new threat, shifted their fire, catching the flanking party in the open. The element of surprise, Crawford's greatest weapon, had been lost. The fighting was brutal but brief. Caught between the fortified ranch house and the professional guns of the bounty hunters, Crawford's gang began to falter. One by one, the gunfire from the darkness sputtered out as men either fell or fled into the night. Then a voice boomed from the yard, Blackwell's. Cease fire, they're pulling back. Silence descended, heavy and smelling of smoke. Charlotte didn't wait for the all-clear. She grabbed her medical kit and rushed out onto the porch. The yard was a scene of chaos. Several men were down, groaning in pain. The hay barn was still burning, casting long, dancing shadows. In the center of it all, Marshal Davis stood over a kneeling figure, James Crawford himself, nursing a bloody arm but looking at Levi with hate-filled eyes. You, Crawford spat as Levi approached, flanked by Blackwell. You traitorous coward. I'm not the one who attacks women and burns homesteads, James, Levi said calmly. He looked at Davis. He's yours, Marshal, $2,000 as promised. Davis looked from the captured outlaw leader to Levi. He holstered his gun slowly. So he is. He motioned for his men to shackle Crawford, and a few of his boys too, by the looks of it. And Quinn, Blackwell asked, his voice low, stepping between Levi and the lawman. Davis paused, pulling a folded paper from his vest pocket, the warrant from Silverton. He looked at it, then at the burning barn, the wounded men, and finally at Charlotte, who had paused in her ministrations to a ranch hand to watch him. Seems to me, Davis said slowly, that Levi Quinn died in the shootout. Brave man, defended his employer to the end. He struck a match against his boot heel and held it to the corner of the warrant. The paper curled into ash, drifting away on the night breeze. Shame about the paperwork, Davis drawled. Terrible thing, fire. Levi let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Thank you. Don't thank me, Davis grunted, jerking his head toward the porch where Charlotte stood. Thank the lady. She's the one who convinced me you were worth more to me alive and free than in irons. As the bounty hunters gathered their prisoners and Blackwell began directing the cleanup, Levi walked toward the porch. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Charlotte. He was covered in soot, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, but his eyes were clear. You shot a man, he said softly. I defended my home, she corrected, her voice trembling only slightly. And the man the people I care about. Levi climbed the steps. He didn't care about the grime on his clothes or the blood on his sleeve. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I thought I'd lost you, he murmured. When I heard that shot. I told you, she whispered against his chest, holding him just as tightly. I'm not running anymore. I'm exactly where I belong. He pulled back, cupping her face in his rough hands. I have nothing to offer you, Charlotte, just a foreman's wage and a past I'm trying to live down. You have everything, she said, honor, courage, a heart that protects the vulnerable. She smiled, tears tracking through the dust on her face. And you have me if you want me. Levi kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of smoke and survival and a future that had finally, miraculously, opened up before them. I want you, he promised. For as long as there's breath in my body. 5 years later, the expansion of the Blackwell Ranch schoolhouse was nearly complete. The new wing would hold a library, something Charlotte had insisted upon. She stood in the doorway of the classroom, watching as a tall man with graying temples lifted a 5-year-old boy up to place the final book on a high shelf. Higher, Papa, the boy commanded. That's as high as I go, Jack, Levi chuckled, setting his son down. He turned, catching Charlotte's eye. The years had been kind to him. The wariness was gone from his gaze, replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who knew he was loved. He walked over to her, resting his hand on the slight swell of her stomach where their second child grew. Blackwell says the new herd is settled in the north pasture, Levi said, and Rebecca got her acceptance letter from the academy in Denver. She's going to be a wonderful teacher, Charlotte said, leaning into his touch.
Levi looked around the room, at the desks filled with children from neighboring homesteads, at the maps on the walls, at the life they had built together from the ashes of their separate pasts. "You know," he said softly, "I still thank God every day for that train."
The train.
"The one that was late," he smiled, touching the brim of his hat where a faded blue jay feather still rested. "And the lady standing alone on the platform who was stubborn enough to take a chance on a cowboy." Charlotte laughed, the sound bright and free. "It wasn't the cowboy I took a chance on, Levi."
No.
"No," she kissed him, surrounded by the laughter of children and the enduring peace of the mountains. "It was the man who saw me when I was invisible, and the man who promised me I'd never have to be alone again." Outside, the sun dipped behind the Rockies, casting a golden glow over the valley, no longer a place of lonely exile, but a home built on the strongest foundation of all.
A promise kept.